My sister-in-law slapped me at my own anniversary dinner for serving myself before her. "You forget your place in this family," she snapped while my husband just looked away. I set down my fork and slapped her back. Then I walked out. My name is Vanessa, 34 years old, and for a decade I carried my husband and his family on my back. As a financial risk auditor, I am trained to spot bad investments, yet my biggest blind spot was my own marriage. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who pushed you too far. The crystal chandeliers at Le Jardin, one of Chicago's most exclusive Michelin star restaurants, cast a warm glow over our private dining table. It was supposed to be a celebration of my 10th wedding anniversary with Gavin. We had invited his immediate family to share the milestone. Instead, it became the exact moment my marriage shattered into unrecognizable pieces. The waiter, dressed in a crisp white uniform, had just placed a stunning platter of thinly sliced Wagyu beef in the center of the pristine tablecloth. I had skipped lunch earlier that day to prepare for this dinner, rushing between meetings and picking up my children Leo and Mia from school. My stomach was turning with hunger. I reached out with my silver tongs to transfer a single piece of the beautifully seared meat onto my empty plate. I did not even get the chance to lower my arm. The sharp crack of skin hitting skin echoed through the private dining room, shocking the air from my lungs. Dominique, my African-American sister-in-law, had lunged across the table and viciously slapped my hand away. The heavy silver tongs clattered loudly against my porcelain plate, creating a sharp ringing sound that hung in the sudden silence. I froze, completely looking up at Dominique. She sat there in her glittering designer gown, her perfectly styled hair, framing a face twisted with absolute unmasked contempt. Before my brain could even process what had just happened, she leaned forward and delivered a second ringing slap right across my left cheek. The physical sting was sharp and hot, but her words were like actual venom injected straight into my veins. "You forget your place in this family, Vanessa." Dominique sneered, her voice dripping with supreme superiority. "A secondary wife never eats before the golden couple. You wait until Trent and I have served ourselves. It is called basic respect." I sat there, my cheek burning furiously, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her physical attack. Dominique and Trent had always acted like royalty, walking around with an unearned sense of grandeur, but this was a terrifying escalation. Striking me in public over a piece of meat was a level of disrespect I could not comprehend. I looked around the table, desperately expecting anyone to intervene and call out her insanity. Instead, my father-in-law Harrison let out a booming, chest-deep laugh, as if Dominique had just delivered a brilliant comedy punchline. My mother-in-law Sylvia smirked behind her crystal wineglass, her eyes dancing with malicious delight at my humiliation. Trent just leaned back in his plush velvet chair, crossing his arms and taking a slow, amused sip of his expensive wine. He looked at me with an expression that explicitly said I deserved exactly what I got. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I turned to Gavin, my husband of 10 years, the father of my 8-year-old son Leo and 6-year-old daughter Mia, the man I had vowed to build an entire life with. I waited for him to stand up, to shout, to protect his wife against his family's insane cruelty. Gavin looked at my red, stinging cheek. He looked at Dominique's triumphant, arrogant sneer. Then he scowled directly at me. "Vanessa, apologize to Dominique right now," Gavin demanded, his voice thick with deep irritation. "You are making everyone uncomfortable and ruining the mood of the entire evening. Just say you are sorry and let us eat in peace. Stop being so dramatic." The sheer absurdity of his demand hit me harder than the physical slap itself. Apologize to the woman who just struck me. I was sitting at a dinner that I had spent 3 months meticulously planning. I had paid the $4,000 non-refundable deposit for this private dining experience just last week, using my own corporate bonus because Gavin's account was routinely overdrawn. I looked at the extravagant clothes Dominique and Trent were wearing. I remembered the luxury cars they drove and the exotic vacations they constantly bragged about on social media, projecting the image of wealthy entrepreneurs. But I knew the dirty, pathetic financial truth hiding behind their designer labels. Trent was a serial business failure. His last 3 ventures had gone entirely bankrupt, leaving a trail of furious creditors and unpaid employees. I knew this because I was the one who quietly bailed them out time and time again. As a senior audit, my income was substantial, and for the last 5 years, Gavin had constantly pressured, begged, and guilt-tripped me into funneling my hard-earned money into Trent's sinking ships just to save the family reputation. I had fully funded the very lifestyle that gave Dominique the delusion that she was royalty and I was a peasant servant. I was the absolute financial spine of this entire family, paying for their cars, their debts, their mistakes, and this very meal. Yet here I was being physically assaulted for trying to eat a piece of steak I had literally purchased with my own labor, while my husband treated me like a disobedient child who had spoken out of turn. The entitlement radiating from the table was suffocating. They genuinely believed I existed solely to fund their delusions of grandeur and absorb their abuse without complaint. Gavin's irritated stare demanding my submission to his brother's wife broke a dam inside me. The years of carrying their financial burdens, the constant disrespect, the enabling of Trent and Dominique's toxic behavior, it all crystallized into a single moment of absolute clarity. They did not see me as family. They saw me as a walking, breathing cash machine that they could kick whenever they pleased. I glanced over at the small kids' table in the corner of the private room, where Leo and Mia were watching with wide, confused eyes. I would never let my children grow up thinking it was acceptable for a woman to be treated this way. I would never let them believe that abuse should be met with an apology, just to keep the peace. The burning sensation on my cheek was no longer humiliation. It was the spark of an inferno. I did not cry. I did not scream. The room expected me to shatter into tears and grovel just like I always did when it came to Gavin's family. Instead, I calmly picked up my crisp linen napkin and wiped my mouth. I placed it neatly on the table. Then I stood up. Dominique was still wearing that smug, victorious grin, expecting Gavin's command to force me into submission. I did not give her the chance. I swung my right hand back and brought it across Dominique's face with twice the force she had used on me. The impact was deafening. Dominique shrieked as the blow knocked her completely off balance. Her expensive designer clutch, which she had placed ostentatiously on the table, crashed to the hardwood floor, spilling lipstick, loose change, and credit cards everywhere. Chaos instantly erupted in the private dining room. Sylvia let out a piercing scream, clutching her pearl necklace as if she had just witnessed a major crime. Trent shoved his chair back so violently it tipped over and slammed against the wall. He stood up with his chest puffed out aggressively, stepping toward me with his fists clenched. "Are you out of your absolute mind?" Trent roared, his voice echoing off the expensive acoustic paneling. Gavin finally found his voice, jumping up from his seat and grabbing my left arm. "What is wrong with you?" Gavin yelled, his face turning a deep shade of purple with rage. I yanked my arm out of his grasp with such force that he stumbled backward into the table. "I am entirely done funding your family's delusions," I said, my voice eerily calm and steady, cutting right through their hysterical screaming. "Enjoy the Wagyu beef. You can pay for it yourself." I turned my back on them, completely ignoring Trent's aggressive posturing and Sylvia's dramatic fake crying. I walked straight to the small table in the corner. Leo and Mia were watching me wide-eyed, but remarkably calm. They were too young to understand the complex financial abuse happening, but they knew their mother was taking charge. "Come on, guys," I said, keeping my tone light and reassuring for their sake. "We are going to have a spontaneous sleepover somewhere else tonight." I grabbed their winter coats and took their small hands in mine. Without looking back at the chaotic screaming matches echoing from the private room, I walked right out the heavy front doors of Le Jardin. I left Gavin standing there with his furious family and a staggering $4,000 bill that his meager bank account could never possibly cover. Let him figure out how to explain his lack of funds to the restaurant manager. The cool Chicago night air hit my face as the valet quickly brought my car around. I tipped him, buckled Leo and Mia safely into the back seat, and promised them we were going on a grand adventure. My hands were shaking slightly on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the massive adrenaline rush of finally breaking the heavy chains I had worn for 10 years. I drove straight toward the city center, pulling up to the grand entrance of a luxury hotel that would provide the safety and comfort my children needed tonight. I parked the car, grabbed our overnight bag from the trunk, which I always kept packed for random business trips, and walked into the opulent lobby. The kids were exhausted, but excited by the grand crystal chandeliers and the polished marble floors reflecting the golden light. I approached the front desk, offering a warm, confident smile to the night concierge. "I need a spacious suite with 2 queen beds for the night, please," I requested. The concierge nodded professionally, typing rapidly into his computer system. "Of course, ma'am. That will be $800 for the night plus a standard deposit for room incidentals." I pulled out my primary joint credit card, a premium rewards card I used for all major household expenses, and handed it over. I spent years building the pristine credit score required to secure that specific card, diligently paying it off every single month, while Gavin constantly swiped it for his endless, useless hobbies. The concierge swiped the shiny card through his terminal. He frowned slightly, examining the screen before trying it a second time. "I am so sorry, ma'am, but this card has been declined by your bank." I felt a slight prickle of confusion run down my spine. "That is completely impossible," I said confidently. "The balance is zero, and the credit limit is $20,000. Please try my other card." I reached into my wallet and handed him a second platinum card from an entirely different banking institution. He swiped it. The machine beeped a harsh denial. "Declined again, ma'am." He looked at me with a polite but deeply apologetic expression. "Do you perhaps have another form of payment you would like to use?" My blood ran ice cold as sudden realization struck me. I pulled out my smartphone and quickly logged into my mobile banking application. A bright red security banner flashed aggressively across the top of my screen. "Account frozen. Access denied. Contact branch manager immediately." Gavin had not just sat at the restaurant trying to figure out how to pay the massive bill. The moment I walked out, his fragile ego and vindictive nature had taken full control. He had immediately called the banks, reported our cards as stolen, and locked me out of all our joint checking and savings accounts in sheer retaliation. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew I had the children with me. He knew we desperately needed a safe place to stay for the night. Yet his immediate instinct was to ruthlessly cut off my financial access, hoping to leave me stranded and deeply humiliated in the middle of the city. He wanted to force me into a corner, so I would have absolutely no choice but to crawl back, beg for his forgiveness, and apologize to Dominique. He truly thought he had completely trapped me. Gavin honestly believed that by freezing our personal accounts, I would be reduced to a weeping, helpless victim begging for mercy in the lobby of a hotel. He severely underestimated the woman he married. I did not panic. I simply smiled reassuringly at the extremely uncomfortable concierge and reached into a hidden zipper compartment at the very back of my designer wallet. As a professional financial risk auditor, I spent my entire career anticipating worst-case scenarios and building solid contingency plans. I never applied that logic to my own husband, but 5 years ago, I established an independent limited liability company for my private consulting contracts. Gavin knew absolutely nothing about this business entity. I pulled out a sleek, heavy black corporate card, embossed with my business name, and slid it across the polished marble counter. "Try this one," I said smoothly. The concierge took the metal card, swiped it through the terminal, and within a fraction of a second, the machine chirped a cheerful approval. A printed receipt slid out. The concierge handed me a pair of electronic keycards with a relieved smile, directing us to a premium suite on the top floor. I guided Leo and Mia into the glass elevator, projecting nothing but absolute calm and excitement for our spontaneous hotel adventure. Once inside the expansive suite, the kids were thrilled by the plush robes and the massive television. I ordered them room service, got them showered, and tucked them into the crisp white sheets of the enormous king bed. Within minutes, the exhaustion of the evening claimed them, and their steady breathing filled the quiet room. With the children safely asleep, I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline. My phone began buzzing aggressively in my coat pocket. I pulled it out to find a massive block of text from Gavin. The message was dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "You thought you could embarrass my family and just walk away," the text read. "I froze every single account. Your debit cards are dead. Your credit cards are dead. You have absolutely nothing without me. You can sleep in your car tonight for all I care. When you are ready to come crawling back, you will drive straight to Trent and Dominique's house. You will get on your knees and you will beg Dominique for forgiveness. Until you grovel to my family, you remain locked out of our finances permanently. Do not test me, Vanessa. I stared at the glowing screen. There was no concern for his young children. There was no horror over his brother's wife physically assaulting the mother of his kids. There was only a desperate, pathetic need to force my submission to maintain his standing in his toxic family. I did not type a response. I did not shed a single tear. I simply turned off my message notifications and tossed the phone onto the velvet sofa. Gavin's threat was laughable. My corporate account had more than enough capital to sustain my children and me for over a year. But his malicious willingness to weaponize our finances to break me triggered every single alarm bell in my auditor brain. The adrenaline from the restaurant incident was slowly fading, replaced by a cold, calculating hypervigilance. I knew I needed to sleep, but my mind was racing through ledgers, bank policies, and asset protection strategies. If Gavin was vindictive enough to freeze the checking accounts while his children were out in the cold, what else was he capable of doing behind my back? I could not leave anything to chance. I pulled my work laptop from my travel bag, sat down at the heavy oak desk in the corner of the suite, and connected to the secure hotel network using my encrypted virtual private network. I needed to run a comprehensive diagnostic check on my entire financial identity. I logged into my secure financial monitoring portal, a premium service I utilize to keep track of my credit health. I punched in my social security number, answered the security questions, and waited for the dashboard to load. I expected to see the recent card freezes and perhaps a slight dip from a high credit utilization ratio. I prided myself on maintaining a flawless credit score hovering solidly in the excellent tier for the past decade. It was the financial foundation that allowed us to secure our mortgage and purchase our vehicles. The screen refreshed, the dashboard materialized. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, leaning closer to the high-resolution screen, entirely convinced the banking software was experiencing a catastrophic glitch. The large circular graphic displaying my credit score was glowing an angry warning red. My pristine, hard-earned credit rating had completely plummeted. It was in a freefall, crashing down into a territory I had not seen since I was a struggling college student. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I bypassed the summary screen and pulled up the detailed, itemized credit report. I scanned past my familiar mortgage line, my auto loan, and my standard revolving credit accounts. Then my eyes locked onto a massive, terrifying anomaly sitting right at the top of the active liabilities section. It was a commercial business loan. The origination date was exactly 2 months ago. The lending institution was a major commercial bank. I stared at the outstanding principal balance in sheer horror, $850,000. A wave of profound nausea washed over me. Nearly $1 million of commercial debt was firmly and legally attached directly to my personal social security number. The account status indicated that a massive initial withdrawal had already been executed. I had absolutely no knowledge of this loan. I had never applied for commercial financing. I had never signed any documents authorizing a debt of this magnitude. My mind raced through the implications. This was not a simple clerical error. Commercial loans of this massive scale require extensive documentation, tax returns, proof of income, and verified signatures. Someone had meticulously compiled my personal financial data, bypassed rigorous security measures, and successfully impersonated me to secure nearly $1 million in funding. The vitriolic text message from Gavin suddenly took on a much darker, far more sinister meaning. He was not just trying to force me to apologize. He was trying to keep me submissive and unaware. The financial punishment was a distraction from a massive, catastrophic financial crime committed right under my nose. I sat alone in the quiet, luxury suite, the glowing screen illuminating my face, realizing that the slap at the restaurant was merely the beginning of an incredibly dangerous war. My fingers flew across the keyboard with a frantic mechanical precision. I needed to see the underlying origination data for this catastrophic debt. I clicked through the secondary layers of the credit inquiry, bypassing the standard consumer view to pull the commercial trade line details. The banking portal processed my request, spinning for what felt like an eternity before presenting the registered business entity tied to the loan. The legal name displayed on the screen was Lux Radiance Medspa LLC. The breath hitched in my throat as a wave of absolute disgust washed over me. Lux Radiance Med Spa. The name echoed in my head, perfectly matching the incessant, obnoxious bragging Dominique had subjected us to for the past 6 months. At every family dinner, every holiday gathering, and every casual Sunday brunch, Dominique had paraded around boasting about her upcoming era as a premier wellness chief executive officer. She claimed she and Trent had secured exclusive private investors for a state-of-the-art beauty and laser clinic in the most expensive commercial district of the city. Trent had strutted around swirling his whiskey, accepting congratulations on his brilliant new entrepreneurial vision. He claimed his previous bankruptcies were just stepping stones to this massive triumph. There were no private investors. There was no brilliant business acumen. There was only my stolen identity. I opened a new browser tab and accessed the State Business Registry database. I typed in the name of the spa and pulled the public incorporation records. My eyes scanned the digital document tracking down to the managing members and the registered financial guarantors. Trent and Dominique were listed as the managing directors. Gavin was listed as the chief financial officer. And right there, listed as the primary financial guarantor with a 100% liability clause, was my full legal name. The horrifying truth of their collusion crystallized in my mind with terrifying clarity. Gavin, Trent, and Dominique had meticulously orchestrated a massive identity theft ring from within my own home. As a financial risk auditor, I know exactly what underwriting departments require to approve a commercial loan of nearly $1 million. They demand comprehensive tax returns, verified pay stubs, extensive credit history reports, and copies of government-issued identification. Trent had a credit score destroyed by serial bankruptcies. Dominique had zero verifiable income. Gavin made a mediocre middle management salary that could never support this level of debt. They needed a pristine financial profile to act as the ultimate shield for the bank. They needed my flawless credit rating. They needed my high corporate salary. They needed my professional credibility as a senior auditor to convince the lending institution that this massive loan was a perfectly safe investment. Gavin had full access to my home office. He knew where I kept my physical files, my previous tax returns, and my backup identification documents. While I was working 60-hour weeks to keep our household afloat and pay for his mistakes, my own husband was rummaging through my filing cabinets. He handed my entire financial life over to his brother and his brother's wife. They took my documents, falsified the corporate agreements, and expertly forged my signature on dozens of legally binding commercial loan contracts. The sheer scale of their betrayal was paralyzing. This was not just a simple case of a husband secretly opening a credit card to hide a shopping habit. This was a highly coordinated, premeditated financial crime. They had weaponized my decade of hard work, my financial discipline, and my professional reputation to fund Dominique's delusional vanity project. I stared at the $850,000 balance, the reality of the legal stakes crashing down on me. If Lux Radiance Med Spa failed, and given Trent's disastrous track record of running businesses into the ground, failure was an absolute certainty. The commercial bank would not go after Trent or Dominique. They would come directly after the primary guarantor. They would come after me. The bank would initiate brutal collection proceedings. They would aggressively garnish my corporate wages. They would place heavy liens on my home and any future assets I tried to acquire. My pristine credit would be completely obliterated, rendering me unable to secure housing or loans for the rest of my life. But the financial ruin was not even the most terrifying part of this nightmare. Because my professional credentials had been utilized to secure the fraudulent funding, my career as an auditor would be instantly destroyed. The financial sector relies entirely on integrity. If my name was tied to a defaulted commercial loan of this magnitude, I would lose my job and my professional licenses immediately. Furthermore, because the loan application crossed state lines digitally and involved a federally insured banking institution, this was no longer a simple civil dispute. It was a severe federal crime. If I did not handle this situation with absolute precision, the federal government could implicate me in the fraud. The authorities might believe I was a willing participant in the scheme who simply got cold feet when the business inevitably went under. I was staring down the barrel of federal bank fraud charges. I could lose my children. I could lose my freedom. I could end up serving a lengthy sentence in a federal prison, while Gavin Trent and Dominique walked away completely unscathed, painting me as the mastermind behind their failed business venture. The slap at the restaurant earlier tonight felt utterly insignificant compared to the sheer violence of this financial assault. Dominique had struck my face, but Gavin had driven a knife directly into my future. He had happily served me up on a silver platter to appease his brother's greed and secure his place as the loyal son in his highly toxic family. They thought they could use my money, destroy my name, and keep me docile by freezing my checking accounts and demanding apologies. I carefully downloaded the master loan agreement directly from the portal, saving it to an encrypted offshore cloud drive that Gavin could never touch. I meticulously captured screenshots of the origination dates, the specific branch where the loan was processed, and the digital signatures attached to the final approval. My eyes scanned the pixelated image of my own forged signature. It was a remarkably good imitation, clearly traced from a physical document Gavin had provided them. The level of premeditation required to pull off this forgery was staggering. They had to sit down, practice my handwriting, compile my tax histories, and confidently present themselves to a loan officer while casually committing a severe felony. The pure audacity of their plan fueled my determination. They had entirely underestimated the wrong woman. I closed the state registry tab and opened a fresh encrypted document on my laptop. The shock and betrayal vanished, replaced by a hyper-focused, freezing rage. I was not going to cry over my husband's betrayal. I was not going to panic about the staggering debt. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire lives. I began typing out a rigorous chronological action plan, gathering every digital footprint, every IP address login, and every forged document I could access from my side of the firewall. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of federal financial fraud, using my name as the collateral. I was going to make absolutely certain that they were the ones who paid the ultimate price. My first move was to execute a total and absolute lockdown of my digital footprint. I opened 3 new secure browser windows and navigated directly to the primary consumer credit reporting agencies, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. With practiced efficiency, I placed a permanent hard security freeze on my social security number across all 3 bureaus. This action immediately blocked any further credit inquiries, ensuring that Gavin Trent and Dominique could not extract a single additional penny under my name. I did not stop there. I systematically changed the passwords to my email accounts, my cloud storage drives, and my internal corporate portals. I enabled biometric multi-factor authentication on everything, severing any lingering digital tethers my husband might have secretly established on my devices. By the time the first rays of morning light began creeping through the hotel windows illuminating the Chicago skyline, I had effectively built an impenetrable digital fortress around my remaining assets. I closed my laptop and rubbed my burning eyes. The soft shifting of sheets drew my attention to the large king bed where Leo and Mia were beginning to wake up. They stretched and rubbed their eyes, blinking at the unfamiliar luxury of the hotel suite. I forced a warm, bright smile onto my face, masking the exhaustion and the fury coursing through my veins. I ordered an extravagant room service breakfast for them, complete with chocolate chip pancakes and fresh berries, framing our sudden departure as a fun weekend staycation. While they happily ate in their plush robes, my phone vibrated on the desk. It was another text message from Gavin. This time, the aggressive, demanding tone from the previous night had completely vanished. He had pivoted to his favorite manipulation tactic, playing the reasonable, concerned husband. "Vanessa, please just come home," the message read. "We both got a little heated last night, but we need to talk about this like adults. I miss you. The kids need to be in their own beds. Please do not tear our family apart over a silly misunderstanding at dinner. Let us fix this. I love you." The sheer audacity of his message made my stomach churn. A silly misunderstanding at dinner. He was actually trying to minimize his brother's wife physically assaulting me as a minor disagreement. Even worse, he was using his supposed love for me and the well-being of our children as bait to lure me back into the house. He needed me docile and unaware. He needed me to return to my role as the blind financial provider so his massive fraud scheme could proceed without interruption. I stared at the message, feeling a profound sense of revulsion. I did not reply. I did not type a single letter. I simply swiped left and deleted the notification, letting my total silence be the only answer he received. I arranged for a trusted, highly vetted childcare service through the hotel concierge to watch Leo and Mia for the morning. I needed to move swiftly, and I needed absolute focus. I changed into a sharp-tailored business suit, grabbed my encrypted hard drive, and headed straight to the downtown offices of Pierce and Caldwell, a premier law firm specializing in corporate fraud and high-net-worth divorces. I had scheduled an emergency meeting with Bradley Pierce, a ruthless, brilliant attorney I had consulted with years ago on a corporate compliance case. Bradley was waiting for me in his corner office overlooking the river. He took one look at my face and knew this was not a social call. I sat down across from his massive glass desk, opened my laptop, and handed him the printed dossier I had compiled overnight. I did not waste time on pleasantries or emotional outbursts. I laid out the facts with the clinical precision of a senior auditor. I am the victim of a coordinated $850,000 identity theft and commercial bank fraud, I stated calmly. The perpetrators are my husband, my brother-in-law, and my sister-in-law. Bradley raised an eyebrow. His professional curiosity instantly piqued. He opened the dossier and began reviewing the documents. I walked him through the timeline, pointing out the forged signatures on the commercial loan agreements and the business incorporation documents for Lux Radiance Med Spa. Then I handed him the ultimate kill shot. It was a network tracking log I had extracted from our home internet router. Gavin is not as smart as he thinks he is, I explained, pointing to a highlighted row of data. This log proves that the exact digital device used to upload my stolen tax forms and identification documents to the commercial bank portal was operating on my home internet network. Furthermore, the device registered is Gavin's personal desktop computer. He executed the fraudulent uploads from our living room while I was at the office. Bradley studied the network logs, his eyes scanning the irrefutable digital paper trail. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. Vanessa, you have basically handed me a fully prepared federal indictment wrapped in a bow. This is not just grounds for a heavily favored divorce. This is federal wire fraud. I nodded, my posture rigid. I want to file for divorce immediately, and I want to report this to the authorities today. I want them arrested. Bradley held up a hand, his expression turning deadly serious. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. I understand the urgency. Vanessa and I completely share your desire to drop the hammer on these people, but we cannot confront them today. In fact, you cannot let them know that you have discovered the fraudulent loan under any circumstances. My brow furrowed in frustration. Why should I wait? They have almost $1 million sitting in a commercial account attached to my name. Because right now they think they have won. Bradley explained, his tone low and urgent. They think you are just angry about a slap at a restaurant. If you confront Gavin now, or if we file a lawsuit that explicitly mentions the fraud, they will immediately panic. Trent and Dominique will begin frantically moving that loan money into offshore accounts or untraceable cryptocurrency wallets to hide it. Gavin will destroy his computer and wipe the home router logs to eliminate the physical evidence. He tapped the dossier firmly. We are dealing with serial grifters. If we give them even an hour of warning, they will scatter the assets and attempt to pin the missing funds entirely on you. We have to build a completely airtight case for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service before anyone knocks on their door. We need to freeze them out legally while keeping them comfortable and completely unaware socially. The realization washed over me. Bradley was absolutely right. A premature explosion would give them the exact window they needed to hide the stolen money, leaving me legally responsible for an empty commercial account. I had to play the long game. I had to swallow my disgust, maintain my strategic silence, and let them believe they were still in complete control of the narrative. What is our next move? I asked, my voice cold and determined. Bradley pulled a fresh legal pad toward him. We let them think they have successfully bullied you into a corner. We are going to draft a separation agreement that looks like you are surrendering. We will use it as bait while we quietly coordinate with federal authorities. But to make this work, Vanessa, you have to be careful. You have to let them believe they broke you. I looked out the window at the sprawling city, thinking of Dominique's smug face and Gavin's manipulative text messages. I had spent 10 years letting them think they were superior. Playing the victim for a few more weeks would be easy, especially knowing that I was the one holding the match to their entire lives. I left Bradley's office with a clear directive. Play the victim, secure the evidence, and let them hang themselves. My first stop earlier that morning had been highly productive. Before meeting with my attorney, I had driven back to Le Jardin and spoken directly with the restaurant manager. After a frank discussion about liability and the potential for a police subpoena, he had discreetly provided me with a digital copy of the private dining room's security footage from the previous night. I had the USB drive safely tucked into my tailored blazer pocket as I walked into the soaring glass atrium of my corporate headquarters. As I swiped my badge at the security turnstile, my phone began vibrating intensely. It was not Gavin this time. The messages were pouring in from distant relatives, college friends, and a few close colleagues. I opened a message from my best friend. It was a screenshot of a public social media post. The blood rushed to my ears. Sylvia and Dominique had launched a synchronized, vicious public smear campaign. The post featured a horrifying, heavily manipulated photograph of Dominique. Her left eye was swollen shut, covered in a grotesque purplish-black bruise that looked like she had been struck with a baseball bat, not slapped with an open palm. The caption beneath the photo was a masterclass in narcissistic gaslighting. "Please pray for our family during this terrifying time," the caption read. Last night, my sister-in-law, Vanessa, suffered a complete psychotic break at our family anniversary dinner. Without any provocation, she violently attacked me, causing severe facial trauma. She then kidnapped her 2 young children and fled into the night. We are terrified for the safety of my niece and nephew. She is unstable, heavily medicated, and highly dangerous. If anyone sees her, please contact the police immediately. They were trying to destroy my reputation before I could defend myself. They wanted to paint me as an unhinged, violent maniac so that when the financial fraud eventually came to light, I would look like a crazy, vindictive ex-wife making up lies. I stepped onto the executive floor, and the atmosphere was instantly suffocating. The usual morning chatter abruptly stopped. Junior analysts stared at me from over their cubicle walls. My own assistant quickly averted her eyes, pretending to be deeply engrossed in a spreadsheet. The rumors had already infected the office. My desk phone rang the second I set my briefcase down. It was the executive assistant to David, the chief financial officer, and my direct superior. He needed to see me in his corner office immediately. I walked into David's office. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, looking incredibly stern. The head of human resources was sitting on the leather sofa holding a printed copy of Dominique's viral post. Vanessa. David began, his voice tight with professional concern. "We have received several anonymous emails this morning containing this social media post. As a senior risk auditor for this firm, your public integrity is paramount. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis or facing criminal assault charges, we need to place you on immediate administrative leave." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I calmly reached into my blazer pocket and retrieved the silver USB drive. I placed it gently on David's desk. "I appreciate the company's concern, David," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I am currently navigating a hostile separation from my husband and his family. The photo in that post is a digital fabrication designed to extort me. This drive contains the high-definition security footage from the restaurant where the alleged attack took place. I invite you and Human Resources to review it right now." David plugged the drive into his computer. The HR director leaned over his shoulder. I stood silently as the crisp color footage played on his monitor. They watched in absolute silence as the video clearly showed Dominique violently lunging across the table, slapping my hand and striking me across the face while Gavin and his parents laughed. They watched my measured singular slap in self-defense, followed by my calm, orderly exit with my children. The contrast between Dominique's hysterical, lying social media post and the cold, hard reality of the security footage was absolute. David paused the video, a look of profound disgust washing over his face. He ejected the drive and handed it back to me. Vanessa, I am incredibly sorry you are dealing with this level of domestic harassment, David said, his stern demeanor completely vanishing. Your job here is entirely secure. Furthermore, I am authorizing our corporate legal team to send a cease and desist order to your in-laws regarding this defamation. Nobody threatens my top auditor. I thanked David and walked out of his office feeling a massive wave of relief. I had successfully insulated my career from their toxic fallout. I had the legal strategy in motion. I had the evidence. I was completely in control. Then my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed the front desk of the luxury hotel where I had left Leo and Mia with the vetted childcare provider. I answered the call expecting a routine question about room service. Ms. Vanessa, the hotel manager's voice was tight, trembling with suppressed panic. I am so sorry to interrupt your workday, but we have an emergency situation in the main lobby. My heart slammed against my ribs. What is wrong? Are my children okay? The children are safe in the suite with the nanny, the manager replied quickly. But you need to return to the hotel immediately. A man claiming to be your husband just breached the lobby security checkpoint. He has a police officer with him, and he is shouting that you are a fugitive. He is demanding that we surrender the room keys and grant him immediate unrestricted access to your suite. I ended the call and practically flew out of the corporate building. My mind processed the variables with the cold efficiency of an auditor detecting a critical anomaly. Gavin was escalating faster than Bradley had predicted. By weaponizing law enforcement and child protective services, he was attempting a brute force hostile takeover of our children. He wanted to catch me off guard, expecting the hysterical, unhinged woman his family had just fabricated on social media. I hailed a cab, refusing to let panic cloud my judgment. I had the security footage. I had my financial portfolios. I had the absolute truth on my side. When I strode through the revolving glass doors of the luxury hotel, the scene in the lobby was deliberately designed for maximum humiliation. Gavin stood near the concierge desk with his chest puffed out, radiating an unearned sense of authority. Beside him stood a uniformed city police officer and a stern-looking woman clutching a clipboard, undoubtedly a social worker from Child Protective Services. Gavin spotted me approaching, and a smug, victorious smirk spread across his face. He actually believed he had won. There she is, Gavin announced loudly, making sure the passing hotel guests could hear every word. Officer, this is the woman I told you about. She is completely unstable. I did not raise my voice. I did not break my stride. I walked directly up to the police officer and extended my hand. Good morning, officer. I am Vanessa. I understand my estranged husband has caused a disturbance. How can I assist you today? The officer looked slightly taken aback by my calm, professional demeanor. He glanced at Gavin, then back to me. Ma'am, your husband has filed an emergency ex-parte custody order. He filed a sworn affidavit stating that you are currently homeless, financially destitute, experiencing a severe psychotic break, and posing an immediate physical danger to your two minor children. We are here to conduct a welfare check and execute the temporary removal of the minors. Gavin crossed his arms, staring down at me with a malicious glint in his eye. You brought this on yourself, Vanessa, he sneered. You cannot just assault my family, drain our bank accounts, and drag my kids to some random location. Hand over the room keys right now. I completely ignored his childish posturing. I turned my attention entirely to the social worker. I appreciate that you are taking a father's concerns seriously, I said smoothly. However, you have been handed a profoundly falsified report. My children are not in danger. They are currently upstairs in a premium suite, being supervised by a fully licensed, bonded, and background-checked childcare professional that this hotel provides for its executive guests. I would be more than happy to invite both of you up to the suite to verify their living conditions and their physical safety. Gavin scoffed loudly, stepping toward the elevator banks. Good, let us go up. I am taking my kids home right now. I stepped directly into his path, blocking him with my body. No, you are not, I stated, my voice dropping to a freezing authoritative register. You are not invited. The authorities are welcome to inspect my children. You will remain in this lobby. The police officer held up a hand, gesturing for Gavin to step back. She is right, sir. You need to stay down here until we verify the situation. We will conduct the welfare check independently. Gavin's smirk faltered slightly, but he aggressively shoved his hands into his pockets and leaned against the marble pillar. Fine. Go see for yourselves. She does not even have a functioning credit card. She is probably squatting in someone else's room. I led the officer and the social worker into the glass elevator and swiped my black corporate card to access the penthouse level. I maintained a steady, polite conversation about the unseasonably cold Chicago weather, demonstrating zero signs of the psychological distress Gavin had sworn I was suffering. When I unlocked the heavy oak door to our suite, the scene inside was a picture of absolute serene perfection. Leo and Mia were sitting at a mahogany dining table bathed in warm morning sunlight. They were wearing thick, fluffy hotel robes and happily eating a massive breakfast spread of Belgian waffles, scrambled eggs, and fresh fruit. The professional nanny sat nearby, helping Mia cut her strawberries. The children looked up and smiled brightly when I walked in, completely unbothered and perfectly safe. The social worker's rigid posture instantly relaxed. She took in the opulent surroundings, the expensive room service, and the clear, relaxed demeanor of the children. This does not look like a destitute or dangerous situation, she noted dryly, writing something on her clipboard. I invited them to sit in the lounge area of the suite. I opened my leather briefcase and pulled out a series of meticulously organized folders. I am a senior financial risk auditor, I explained, placing the first folder on the glass coffee table. Here are my verified financial statements from an independent corporate entity I control. As you can see, I possess substantial liquid assets. I am far from destitute. My husband illegally froze our joint checking accounts last night in an attempt to strand me, but I am entirely self-sufficient. I placed a second folder next to the first. These are my comprehensive medical records, including my recent annual physical and mental health screening required by my corporate life insurance policy. I have absolutely no history of mental illness, no prescriptions for psychotropic medications, and zero history of violence. My husband completely fabricated the claim of a psychotic break. The police officer frowned, flipping through the pristine financial documents and the medical clearances. Your husband filed a sworn statement that you violently attacked his sister-in-law last night. He claimed you were completely unhinged and a danger to society. I was waiting for that exact moment. I reached into my blazer and withdrew my laptop. I woke the screen and loaded the high-definition security file I had retrieved from the restaurant manager. I turned the screen toward the officers. This is the security footage from Le Jardin recorded at 8 o'clock last night. Please watch closely. The social worker and the police officer leaned in. They watched the silent, undeniable truth play out on the screen. They saw Dominique lunge across the table unprovoked. They saw her violently slap my hand and strike my face. They watched the rest of the family laugh. They watched me deliver a single measured slap in pure self-defense, calmly gather my children, and walk out of the restaurant without a single scream or frantic gesture. The video ended. The room was perfectly quiet, save for the sound of Leo and Mia giggling over their waffles in the background. The police officer stood up, his jaw clenched tight with professional anger. He reached for his radio, his eyes locked on mine with a newfound expression of deep respect. Ms. Vanessa, I sincerely apologize for intruding on your morning. Your husband has weaponized a civil matter and filed a false police report. He lied on a sworn legal affidavit to manipulate the court system and Child Protective Services. That is a serious offense. The social worker nodded in agreement, snapping her clipboard shut. This case is closed on our end. Your children are in excellent care. I will be submitting a report to the family court judge detailing that the father committed perjury to obtain the ex parte order. It will be vacated immediately. I escorted them back down to the grand lobby. Gavin was pacing back and forth near the front desk, practically vibrating with nervous, vindictive energy. When he saw the elevator doors open, he rushed forward, expecting the officers to hand the children over to him. Where are they? Gavin demanded, looking past us into the empty elevator car. Go back up there and get my kids. She is crazy. The police officer stepped directly into Gavin's personal space, forcing my husband to take a startled step backward. Sir, the officer growled, his hand resting near his duty belt. We have reviewed the mother's financial statements, her medical records, and the high-definition security footage of the incident at the restaurant last night. We have concluded that you deliberately lied on a sworn legal document to obtain an emergency custody order under false pretenses. Gavin's face drained of all color. He opened his mouth, stammering, trying to form a coherent sentence, but the officer cut him off. Filing a false police report is a crime. Committing perjury on an affidavit is a crime. You are currently dangerously close to leaving this hotel in handcuffs. The mother retains full temporary custody of the children, and you are no longer welcome on these premises. If you attempt to contact her or breach her room again, you will be arrested for trespassing and harassment. Gavin stared at me, his eyes wide with absolute shock and rising terror. The smug, victorious facade he had worn just 20 minutes ago had completely vaporized. He realized, perhaps for the first time in his life, that his family's reality distortion field did not work on the actual legal system. I simply adjusted the strap of my briefcase, offered him a cold, unblinking stare, and turned my back on him. I walked away, leaving him to face the wrath of the humiliated police officer, while I returned to the peace of my suite, perfectly positioned to execute the next phase of my strategy. I returned to the peace of my suite, perfectly positioned to execute the next phase of my strategy. I locked the heavy oak door behind me, ensuring my children were still happily occupied with their breakfast, and immediately dialed Bradley Pierce. My attorney answered on the first ring. I gave him a brief clinical summary of the catastrophic failure Gavin had just experienced in the hotel lobby, detailing how the police officer had threatened him with perjury charges. Bradley chuckled, a low, predatory sound that assured me I had hired the absolute best legal representation in Chicago. But the amusement quickly faded as we shifted our focus to the long game. We needed Gavin Trent and Dominique to feel completely secure and untouchable. If they suspected for even a fraction of a second that I was building a federal bank fraud case against them, they would panic. They would immediately start moving the stolen $850,000 into untraceable offshore accounts or complex cryptocurrency wallets. Narcissists operate on a very predictable frequency. When they feel dominant, they get incredibly sloppy. I walked over to the window, watching the busy Chicago streets below, formulating the exact wording I needed to use. I instructed Bradley to draft a separation agreement that looked incredibly generous, overwhelmingly naive, and completely desperate. I needed them to believe that the lobby incident had drained the last of my fighting spirit. I wanted them to think I was a terrified, exhausted woman who just wanted to escape the marriage regardless of the financial cost to myself. The separation agreement Bradley drafted that afternoon was a masterpiece of legal deception. On the surface, it looked like a total humiliating surrender. The document explicitly stated that I was unconditionally waiving my right to any spousal support or alimony from Gavin. Furthermore, it offered him absolute sole ownership of our marital home. I attached a brief, highly emotional personal letter to the front of the legal packet. In it, I claimed that my mental health was my top priority and that I simply wanted a peaceful exit from the toxic family dynamic. I wrote that I was willing to walk away empty-handed just to ensure a smooth, conflict-free transition for our children. It was the exact type of pathetic, weak narrative that Gavin and his deeply insecure family fed on. I knew his ego would never allow him to admit he could not afford the house on his own. He would see keeping the property as the ultimate symbol of his dominance. However, buried deep within the standard property transfer clauses was a massive financial time bomb. 2 years ago, Gavin had insisted we take out a home equity line of credit, essentially a second mortgage for $150,000 to fund one of Trent's failed tech startup ventures. Because Gavin had managed that specific transaction, he was the primary borrower on that secondary debt, while I was only listed as a secondary guarantor. By signing the separation agreement and accepting sole ownership of the property, Gavin was legally assuming absolute unilateral responsibility for that massive hidden debt. Bradley sent the documents over to Gavin via a standard courier service later that same afternoon. I did not have to wait long for the reaction. My phone lit up with a barrage of triumphant, gloating text messages from my soon-to-be ex-husband. He had taken the bait completely. He bragged that I had finally realized I was nothing without his family's approval and protection. He mocked my decision to walk away from the marital assets, calling me weak and financially illiterate. He proudly announced that he had already signed the documents in front of a notary and filed them with the county clerk. He actually believed he had bullied me into utter submission. Through mutual acquaintances on social media, I watched the immediate arrogant celebration unfold. Dominique and Sylvia posted live videos of themselves toasting with expensive champagne at their exclusive country club, celebrating Gavin's massive victory over his unstable wife. Sylvia even added a comment about how thankful she was that Gavin was finally free from my controlling grip. Trent posted a long pseudo-philosophical rant about cutting toxic energy out of their lives and protecting their generational wealth. They were so blinded by their own immense ego and their deep hatred for me that they did not even bother to have an independent financial lawyer review the property transfer clauses. They celebrated signing a document that legally locked Gavin into a crushing six-figure debt on a house he could not possibly afford to maintain on his mediocre middle management salary. While they blindly celebrated their supposed triumph, I received a digital alert that made my blood run cold. It was a promotional flyer blasted across local high society social media channels and elite business networking groups. Lux Radiance Med Spa was officially announcing its grand opening for the following weekend. Dominique and Trent were sparing absolutely no expense. The digital invitation boasted a massive red carpet event, complete with premium champagne towers, custom ice sculptures, celebrity guest appearances, and a private performance by a well-known musical artist. They had even rented out an entire block of the commercial district for complimentary luxury valet parking. It was a grotesque, opulent display of extreme wealth. I stared at the screen, analyzing the sheer audacity of their actions. They were using my pristine financial standing to buy themselves a night of fake high society glory. Every single penny of it was being funded by the fraudulent commercial loan attached to my personal social security number. They were burning through my stolen funds at an astronomical rate, throwing a massive party to celebrate themselves, while genuinely believing I was crying in a hotel room with nothing left to my name. The clock was officially ticking. If I did not act with absolute precision, the stolen $850,000 would evaporate into caterers, event planners, and designer gowns, leaving me with a staggering liability and a completely destroyed professional reputation. I immediately forwarded the grand opening invitation to Bradley and my contacts at the federal level. The stage was perfectly set for the ultimate collision. The stage was perfectly set for the ultimate collision. But I needed to map every single dollar of that fraudulent commercial loan before the trap snapped shut. The $850,000 was not just sitting idle in a checking account. Trent and Dominique were actively bleeding it dry, and as a senior financial risk auditor, tracking corporate hemorrhages is exactly what I do best. I locked myself in the hotel suite bedroom, opened my encrypted audit software, and began pulling the digital threads of Lux Radiance MedSpa. When you audit massive financial institutions, you learn very quickly that dirty money always leaves a trail. Thieves are rarely as smart as they think they are, and Trent was a notoriously sloppy businessman. I bypassed the standard consumer interfaces and used the routing numbers from the original loan document to execute a deep dive into the transaction ledgers. I watched the money move in real time. I tracked the massive outbound wire transfers to luxury caterers, high-end event planners, and custom interior designers. They were burning cash on crystal chandeliers and imported Italian marble for the spa lobby. But as I kept digging through the ledger, I noticed a severe glaring anomaly. A massive chunk of the capital had completely bypassed the business operational accounts. I flagged a massive wire transfer executed just 48 hours after the loan origination. It was for exactly $200,000. The funds were not routed to a medical equipment supplier or a commercial real estate broker. The money was funneled through a hastily established shell company and then deposited directly into a joint personal checking account. I ran a reverse search on the destination routing number. The account belonged to Harrison and Sylvia. My stomach turned as the absolute depravity of their scheme came into sharp focus. Trent and Dominique had not just stolen my identity to fund a delusional vanity project. They had actively colluded with my in-laws to pay off Harrison and Sylvia's massive hidden gambling debts. For years, Gavin had made passing remarks about his parents taking frequent weekend trips to the casinos, always laughing it off as a harmless retirement hobby. It was not a hobby. It was a severe addiction that had apparently pushed them to the brink of financial ruin. Instead of facing reality, the entire family had conspired to use my pristine credit rating as a personal bailout fund. They stole my name, forged my signature, and illegally enriched themselves to escape their own catastrophic failures. I documented the illegal transfer, capturing the timestamps and the destination account details. Loan funds for personal use is a severe violation of federal banking regulations. But as I looked closer at the origin of the loan, a profound realization hit me. I stared at the official corporate logo of the lending institution on the digital paperwork. The loan had been underwritten and disbursed by Apex Financial Equities. My breath caught in my throat. Apex Financial Equities was not just a random commercial bank, it was a direct, wholly owned subsidiary of the exact financial conglomerate I audited. The sheer scale of their stupidity was almost unbelievable. Gavin and Trent had blindly shopped for the fastest commercial loan approval they could find, leveraging my corporate credentials to bypass standard underwriting friction. In their greedy haste, they failed to realize they were committing massive bank fraud against the very corporation that issued my paychecks. They had essentially robbed my employer using my stolen identity. This completely changed the legal landscape. I was no longer just a victim of identity theft. I was a senior corporate officer who had discovered a massive internal compliance breach. I had the direct authority to flag this transaction to the highest levels of federal oversight without waiting for standard police bureaucracy. I immediately began drafting a secure encrypted whistleblower report directed straight to the chief compliance officer of our parent company. I attached the forged loan documents, the IP address logs proving Gavin executed the fraud from our living room, and the detailed ledger showing the $200,000 embezzled by Harrison and Sylvia. I was meticulously building the airtight case Bradley required, ensuring that when the federal agents moved, there would be absolutely no escape for any of them. Just as I hit save on the encrypted file, a bright red security alert flashed across my personal cell phone screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was an urgent notification from the investment firm that managed Leo and Mia's college savings accounts. I had personally set up those education funds when each of my children was born, diligently depositing a portion of my bonuses every year to ensure they would graduate debt-free. The alert indicated that a massive expedited wire transfer had just been initiated. Someone was attempting to liquidate both college funds entirely. I logged into the investment portal with frantic speed. The pending transaction showed a withdrawal request for $85,000, effectively emptying the accounts. I checked the destination details. The funds were being routed directly to a luxury foreign automotive dealership in the downtown district. Gavin was trying to steal our children's future to buy a high-end sports car. The audacity of his cruelty was staggering. He had signed the separation agreement claiming the marital home and assuming he had beaten me. Now fueled by his unchecked ego and the desire to show off at Dominique's red carpet spa opening next week, he was plundering his own children's education funds to purchase a luxury vehicle. He wanted to pull up to the grand opening looking like a massive success, completely unbothered by the fact that he was bankrupting his son and daughter to do it. I did not panic. I acted with freezing, lethal precision. Because I was the primary custodian who established the accounts, my secondary authorization was legally required for any expedited liquidation. Gavin had bypassed the initial security check using his secondary login, but the system had automatically flagged the massive outbound wire for final approval. I clicked the giant red cancellation button. I immediately revoked his administrative access, locked the accounts down with biometric security measures, and changed the primary disbursement rules to require my physical presence at a bank branch for any future withdrawals. The wire transfer to the luxury dealership was instantly rejected. I sat back in my chair staring at the screen, my blood running cold with absolute clarity. Gavin was willing to destroy everything I had built for our children just to feed his pathetic, insatiable need for his family's approval. Any lingering shred of pity I might have felt for the man I married was completely eradicated. He was a parasite and his family was a disease. They were going to walk onto that red carpet next week expecting a royal coronation. I was going to ensure it became their absolute destruction. The following morning, I walked into the executive suites of our corporate headquarters with a singular devastating objective. I bypassed my usual workstation and requested an immediate classified meeting with Mitchell Davis, the Chief Compliance Officer for Apex Financial Equities. Mitchell was a formidable veteran of the banking sector, a man who possessed zero tolerance for financial irregularities. He ushered me into his soundproof glass office, his expression shifting to intense professional concern when he saw the thick encrypted dossier in my hands. I sat across from him and laid out the printed copies of the commercial loan origination files. I did not soften the blow. I informed him that Apex Financial Equities had just disbursed an $850,000 commercial business loan based entirely on fraudulent documentation, stolen credentials, and forged signatures. Mitchell stared at me, his seasoned composure fracturing. He demanded to know how an external grifter bypassed their robust underwriting security. I placed my official notarized corporate signature on the glass desk right next to the loan documents. I told him they bypassed the security because the perpetrators stole the identity of one of his own senior risk auditors. I pointed to the signature on the Lux Radiance MedSpa guarantor forms. I showed him the microscopic hesitations in the pen strokes, the incorrect slants, and the blatant tracing marks. I presented the IP logs proving the application was submitted from my residential router by my estranged husband. The reality of the catastrophic security breach washed over Mitchell. The bank had been expertly conned, and the collateral shielding nearly $1 million of their capital was completely fabricated. The corporate panic was instantaneous and severe. Mitchell grabbed his desk phone and initiated a Priority 1 emergency lockdown. Within 10 minutes, the head of corporate legal and the vice president of commercial lending were rushing into the office. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, bordering on absolute chaos. Commercial banks stand to lose millions in shareholder value if systemic underwriting flaws are exposed to regulatory agencies. But I did not let the room descend into panic. I took complete control of the meeting. I projected my encrypted audit trail onto the large monitor on the wall, walking the senior executives through every single unauthorized transaction. I showed them exactly where the capital had flowed, highlighting the extravagant vendor payments for the spa and the highly illegal $200,000 diversion directly into the personal checking accounts of Harrison and Sylvia. I handed the legal team a fully mapped verified ledger of the embezzlement. I had essentially done their entire internal investigation for them before they even knew a crime had been committed. The executives were stunned by the sheer precision of my evidence. The vice president of commercial lending looked physically ill, realizing that his department had approved a massive payout to a serial bankrupt like Trent simply because my stolen credentials were glued to the front page. The gravity of the situation escalated rapidly when the legal team reviewed the routing data. Mitchell stood up, his face grim, and confirmed what I already knew. Because the loan application was processed through a centralized server located in a different state, and because the disbursed funds had been wired across state lines to various luxury vendors, this had crossed the threshold of local jurisdiction. Furthermore, Apex Financial Equities was a federally insured institution. This was no longer a simple case of domestic identity theft. It was a massive, highly coordinated federal crime. Mitchell informed the room that banking compliance regulations required mandatory and immediate escalation. He picked up his secure line and directly contacted the white-collar crime division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, simultaneously looping in the Criminal Investigation Unit of the Internal Revenue Service due to the untaxed embezzled capital given to my in-laws. I sat quietly in the leather chair listening as Mitchell handed my immaculate dossier over to federal authorities. The FBI agents on the conference call were highly impressed by the airtight paper trail I had provided. They confirmed that with this level of verified digital evidence, they could bypass weeks of preliminary investigations and move straight to securing federal warrants. The wheels of absolute crushing justice were officially turning, and my husband had no idea the federal government was now actively monitoring his every move. With the corporate and federal machinery securely locked onto their targets, I returned to the peace of my luxury hotel suite that evening. The contrast between my quiet, methodical destruction of their lives and their loud, arrogant ignorance was almost poetic. I ordered a light dinner, checked in with the nanny watching Leo and Mia, and sat down on the velvet sofa. My phone vibrated with an incoming text message. I expected it to be a logistical update from my attorney Bradley, but the caller ID displayed Dominique's name. I had not blocked her number yet purely because I needed to preserve every piece of communication as evidence of her ongoing harassment. I opened the message. An incredibly high-resolution photograph loaded on the screen. Dominique was standing in the center of what looked like a chaotic, half-finished spa lobby, surrounded by boxes of imported marble tiles and expensive laser equipment. She was posing aggressively, wearing a breathtakingly expensive custom-designed sequined gown that hugged her figure. She held a glass of champagne in one hand, smiling with that same arrogant, superior sneer she wore the night she slapped me at the restaurant. The text beneath the photograph was dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. The message read, "Just picked up my dress for the grand opening. This is what real luxury looks like. Enjoy living out of a suitcase in a depressing hotel, secondary wife. Real CEO duties call. Do not worry, we might let you sweep the floors if you ever decide to grovel." I stared at the glowing screen, taking in the sheer spectacular irony of her insult. She was mocking me while standing in a building financed by my stolen identity, wearing a dress bought with funds that were currently being tracked by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She genuinely believed she had ascended to the ranks of high society, utterly blind to the fact that the very ground she stood on was a federal crime scene. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I felt a profound, chilling sense of satisfaction. I took a screenshot of the message, forwarded it directly to the lead FBI agent assigned to our case as proof of her spending the stolen assets, and set my phone down. Dominique wanted to play the role of an elite chief executive officer on a glamorous red carpet. I was going to ensure her grand opening was the most unforgettable event of her entire life. The weekend arrived, bringing with it a profound and unexpected tranquility. I spent Saturday and Sunday completely disconnected from the digital chaos of my impending divorce and the looming federal investigation. Inside the soundproof walls of our luxury hotel suite, the world shrunk down to just Leo, Mia, and me. We ordered expensive room service for every single meal, built massive forts out of the premium hotel pillows, and watched animated movies until we fell into a deep sleep in a tangle of limbs and incredibly soft blankets. For the first time in 10 years, I was not anticipating Gavin coming home to ruin the peace with complaints about his day or demands for money to fund his family's latest disaster. I was entirely present with my children. While they napped on Sunday afternoon, I sat at the mahogany desk and finalized the paperwork for our new permanent home, using the capital securely held within my independent corporate entity. I purchased a stunning 4-bedroom townhouse in one of the safest, most highly rated school districts in the state. The property transaction was executed entirely in cash under the name of my limited liability company. Gavin's name was nowhere near the deed. He would never possess a legal claim to a single brick of that house. I signed the final electronic closing documents with a deep sense of absolute liberation. My children and I had a beautiful, secure fortress waiting for us, completely untainted by the toxic dysfunction of their father's family. First thing Monday morning, my secure phone line rang. It was Special Agent Reynolds, the lead federal investigator assigned to the wire fraud case. His tone was brisk, professional, and dripping with imminent action. The federal magistrate had officially signed off on the severe arrest warrants for Gavin, Trent, and Dominique after thoroughly reviewing my flawless financial audit trails. The Internal Revenue Service had also approved the immediate asset seizure protocols for Harrison and Sylvia's personal bank accounts. Reynolds informed me that the financial task force was fully prepared to execute the takedown. We discussed the tactical timing. I told him about the massive red carpet grand opening event Dominique had been relentlessly promoting across local luxury networking channels scheduled for this upcoming Saturday evening. Agent Reynolds agreed that executing the warrants during the grand opening presented the most strategic advantage. The perpetrators would all be gathered in a single highly controlled location, surrounded by the very assets they had purchased with the stolen commercial loan funds. It would allow the federal agents to simultaneously apprehend the suspects and physically seize the fraudulently obtained commercial property without having to track them down across multiple residential addresses. The plan was locked in place. The bank compliance officers and the federal task force were going to let Dominique roll out her red carpet, pour her stolen champagne, and gather her affluent guests before bringing the entire glittering facade crashing down. On Wednesday afternoon, a courier arrived at the hotel front desk, carrying a thick gold-embossed envelope addressed to me. I opened it to find an outrageously extravagant VIP invitation to the Lux Radiance Med Spa grand opening gala. The heavy cardstock practically reeked of my stolen $850,000. Moments after the courier departed, my phone buzzed with a highly aggressive text message from Gavin. I received notification that you got the invitation. The message read, "I expect you to show up at the spa on Saturday night. I want you to walk the red carpet and see what real success actually looks like. I want you to look at my brother and his wife and realize how pathetic it was for you to hold us back all these years. Bring the final divorce papers with you. You are going to sign them in front of me in my family's new building so I can finally be done with your dead weight." The sheer blinding, unapologetic arrogance of his demand was absolutely staggering to read. He was inviting the woman whose identity he had just stolen to come and marvel at the fruits of his federal crime. He genuinely thought forcing me to sign divorce papers at his brother's fraudulent business launch would be the ultimate crushing humiliation that would break my spirit forever. Before I could even process the absolute delusion of Gavin's text, a new notification popped up on my screen. It was a lengthy, belligerent voicemail left by my father-in-law, Harrison. I pressed play, listening to his raspy, entitled voice fill the quiet room. "Listen to me very carefully," Vanessa Harrison growled into the receiver. "Gavin told us you are hiding in some hotel and refusing to bring our grandchildren around. You will show up to this grand opening on Saturday, and you will bring Leo and Mia so they can see what their family has achieved. You are going to put on a nice dress smile for the cameras and pay your respects to Trent and Dominique. If you try to keep my grandchildren away from this family milestone, I swear I will drag you through family court so fast your head will spin. I have already spoken to a lawyer about suing you for full grandparents' rights. You do not get to disrespect this family and just walk away with our blood. I will bankrupt you in court if I have to." The recording clicked off. I stared at the phone, a cold, lethal calm washing over my entire body. Harrison was threatening to bankrupt me in family court, completely oblivious to the fact that the Internal Revenue Service was currently processing the seizure of his home to recover the stolen $200,000 sitting in his checking account. They wanted me to show up and pay my respects. I decided right then and there that I would absolutely and completely honor their ridiculous request. I would attend their spectacular grand opening without hesitation, and I would personally bring the ultimate devastating reckoning right to their beautiful, fraudulently financed front door. Saturday evening arrived with a crisp electric chill in the Chicago air. I arranged for the hotel nanny to keep Leo and Mia occupied with a movie marathon and a decadent room service dessert buffet. I needed zero distractions. I walked into the expansive marble bathroom of the hotel suite and began my preparations. I did not shed a single tear. I did not opt for an elegant evening gown, a cocktail dress, or anything that would remotely suggest I was there to blend into their ridiculous high society party. I dressed for a corporate execution. I pulled my sharpest, most intimidating power suit from its garment bag. It was a tailored dark charcoal wool ensemble with a razor-sharp cut that projected absolute unyielding authority. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and my signature black stiletto heels. I pulled my hair back into a severe, flawless chignon, leaving no room for softness or vulnerability. I applied a minimalist layer of makeup, finishing with a bold blood-red lipstick. I looked into the mirror and saw the reflection of a chief executive officer ready to dismantle a hostile corporation. I felt a cold surge of adrenaline pumping through my veins, washing away any lingering exhaustion from the past few days. I placed the finalized, supposedly generous separation agreement into my sleek leather briefcase, alongside my heavily encrypted digital tablet. I handed the valet my ticket and slid into the driver's seat of my vehicle. The drive to the upscale commercial district took 20 minutes, and I used every single second of it to confirm our tactical positioning. I placed my attorney Bradley on speakerphone. His voice crackled through the car audio system, crisp and highly focused. We ran through the final legal checklist with surgical precision. The temporary custody order was firmly secured. The asset freezes were fully queued within the federal banking system. The seizure warrants were completely signed by the federal magistrate. Bradley confirmed that Special Agent Reynolds and his federal task force were already in position, operating silently in unmarked black sports utility vehicles parked just out of sight from the main event entrance. They were waiting for my signal to bring the hammer down. The local city police department had also set up a wide perimeter to manage the expected crowd control issues once the federal raid officially commenced. Everything was perfectly, flawlessly synchronized. I was the designated trigger. Bradley instructed me to walk and confirm the primary targets were physically present in the main lobby and send him a single one-word text message. At that exact moment, the federal agents would converge on the red carpet. I thanked Bradley, disconnected the call, and gripped the steering wheel tightly as the glowing, extravagant lights of Lux Radiance Med Spa came into view. The scene playing out on the street was a masterclass in stolen, unearned opulence. Trent and Dominique had spared absolutely no expense blowing through my hijacked commercial loan. A massive plush red carpet stretched from the curb all the way up to the towering glass doors of the spa. Brilliant white spotlights swept across the night sky, illuminating the building like a Hollywood premiere. A heavy velvet rope held back a small crowd of curious onlookers, while aggressive flashbulbs erupted continuously from hired event photographers. Expensive luxury vehicles were lined up around the block, handing over keys to the complimentary valet service. I parked my personal car in a discreet public parking garage a block away and walked toward the blinding lights. As I approached the edge of the velvet rope, the sheer absurdity of the spectacle washed over me. There, standing squarely in the center of the flashing cameras, was Dominique. She was posing aggressively, wearing a breathtakingly expensive custom-designed sequined gown that hugged her figure perfectly. She threw her head back, laughing loudly for the photographers, soaking up the fake adoration. Trent stood right beside her, wearing a bespoke tailored tuxedo, holding a delicate crystal flute of incredibly expensive vintage champagne. He looked exactly like the successful visionary entrepreneur he always pretended to be. Their delusion was entirely on display. I scanned the bustling, affluent crowd and quickly spotted Gavin. He was standing near the entrance holding a cocktail and bragging loudly to a group of local city politicians and wealthy socialites. He was gesturing wildly, taking credit for the architectural design of the building, completely intoxicated by his own fabricated success. I adjusted my grip on my leather briefcase, bypassed the velvet rope, and stepped directly onto the red carpet. My charcoal power suit stood out drastically against the sea of cocktail dresses and silk ties. The rhythmic clicking of my stiletto heels against the pavement seemed to cut through the ambient party music echoing from inside the building. I did not pause for the photographers. I walked straight toward the grand glass entrance with singular focus. It only took a few seconds for the atmosphere around me to shift. The hired security guard at the door looked confused by my corporate attire, unsure if he should stop me or ask for an invitation. Before he could make a decision, Dominique turned her head. Her eyes locked onto mine across the crowded entryway. The arrogant, triumphant smile on her face instantly contorted into a mask of pure, vicious malice. She handed her champagne flute to a passing waiter, whispered something to Trent, and immediately marched straight toward me. She was practically vibrating with excitement, clearly believing that her ultimate moment of victory had arrived. She thought I was the broken, destitute woman coming to surrender on her territory. She thought she was about to deliver the final crushing blow in front of the most affluent crowd in the entire city. She wanted a public spectacle to cement her status. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold, hard weight of the federal warrants backing my every move, and stepped forward to give her exactly what she wanted. Dominique closed the distance between us with heavy, aggressive strides, the sequins of her designer gown catching the harsh glare of the flashing cameras. She stopped deliberately short, invading my personal space, her face twisted into a mask of pure theatrical malice. She raised her voice, ensuring that the affluent guests, local politicians, and lingering photographers could hear every single syllable she spoke. Well, look who finally decided to crawl out of her cheap hotel room, Dominique projected, sweeping her arm out to gesture at my tailored charcoal suit. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to my brother-in-law's jealous broke ex-wife. I guess she saw the lights and realized she made a massive mistake trying to go up against our family empire. The music seemed to lower in volume as heads turned toward us. The elite crowd, always hungry for high society drama, paused their conversations and stared. Trent sauntered over, standing right beside his wife, crossing his arms and shaking his head in mock pity. Dominique laughed, a shrill, piercing sound that grated against the crisp night air. "Did you really come all the way down here just to beg for a job, Vanessa?" She mocked, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "I know Gavin cut off your credit cards and you are probably desperate for cash, but you are not qualified to work at a premier medical spa. Maybe if you go around the back to the service entrance, I can see if our maintenance crew needs someone to sweep the floors after the real executives go home." The surrounding guests murmured, some looking uncomfortable, others whispering to each other behind their champagne flutes. They were witnessing what appeared to be a brutal public humiliation. Dominique stood tall, her chin raised high, completely intoxicated by her own perceived dominance. She was waiting for me to break. She expected me to scream, to cry, or to turn around and run away in absolute shame. She wanted the satisfaction of watching me crumble on her red carpet, surrendering my dignity to her stolen wealth. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or attempt to defend my financial standing. I simply stood there, perfectly anchored in my power suit, and offered her a cold, unblinking smile. The absolute lack of emotional reaction seemed to confuse her. The triumphant sneer on her face faltered for a fraction of a second as she tried to comprehend why I was not completely devastated. I slowly raised my left wrist and deliberately checked the time on my silver watch. It was exactly 8:15 in the evening, the precise moment Bradley and I had synchronized with the federal task force. "Right on schedule," I said softly, my voice carrying a freezing, lethal edge that only Dominique and Trent could hear. Before Dominique could ask what I meant, the entire atmosphere of the street shifted violently. The heavy, rhythmic thumping of the party music was suddenly drowned out by the aggressive roar of powerful engines. The crowd gasped and parted as three massive, unmarked black sports utility vehicles aggressively swerved past the velvet ropes, completely bypassing the complimentary luxury valet service. They slammed on their brakes directly in front of the grand glass entrance, their tires screeching harshly against the pavement. The sudden chaotic arrival shattered the elegant facade of the grand opening. Photographers scrambled backward, their cameras clicking frantically to capture the unexpected disruption. The heavy doors of the vehicles swung open simultaneously with military precision. 5 large men stepped out onto the red carpet. They were not wearing designer tuxedos or carrying expensive champagne. They wore dark tactical windbreakers with stark yellow letters across the back and badges clipped securely to their belts. They were federal agents from the White-Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Right behind them emerged 2 older men in sharp, conservative business suits clutching thick leather briefcases. I recognized them immediately. They were the senior compliance officers from Apex Financial Equities, the very bank that had issued the fraudulent commercial loan currently funding this entire extravagant party. The federal agents moved with terrifying synchronized purpose. They did not pause to admire the ice sculptures or the imported Italian marble in the lobby. They formed a tight, imposing perimeter around the main entrance, their hands resting cautiously near their tactical belts. The 2 bank compliance officers stood directly behind the lead agent, their faces set in grim, uncompromising lines. The affluent guests began backing away, the realization quickly dawning on them that this was not a surprise celebrity appearance or a dramatic marketing stunt. The flashing lights of the cameras reflected off the cold metal of the agents' badges, casting long, menacing shadows across the pristine red carpet. Gavin, who had been busy bragging to a group of local city politicians near the door, completely misread the severity of the situation. Blinded by his own immense ego and his desperate need to play the role of a successful corporate titan, he assumed these imposing figures were high-level dignitaries or incredibly wealthy private investors that Trent had somehow managed to invite. He saw the suits, the aggressive entrance, and the commanding presence, and his narcissistic brain immediately translated it into VIP arrivals. Gavin quickly set down his cocktail on a passing waiter's tray and stepped forward, pushing his way through the murmuring crowd. He adjusted his silk tie, puffed out his chest, and marched right past me, and Dominique, completely oblivious to the freezing terror now spreading across his brother's face. "Welcome to Lux Radiance Med Spa, gentlemen." Gavin projected loudly, extending his hand toward the lead federal investigator with a wide, arrogant smile. "I am Gavin, the chief financial officer of this incredible establishment. We are absolutely thrilled you could make it to our grand opening. Let me personally escort you inside to the VIP lounge so we can get you a drink and show you what real success looks like." Gavin stood there with his hand extended, waiting for the federal agent to shake it. He was practically vibrating with self-importance, thoroughly convinced he was cementing his status among the elite. He had absolutely no idea that the men standing in front of him were not there to admire his stolen architectural design or celebrate his fake business empire. He had no clue that his entire fabricated reality was about to violently collapse. I was standing on a red carpet bought with a forged signature, welcoming the very people who were carrying a federal arrest warrant with his full legal name typed boldly across the top. The lead FBI agent ignored Gavin's extended hand. He bypassed the fake pleasantries, his voice cutting through the confused murmurs like a heavy steel blade. "I am Special Agent Reynolds with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he announced, projecting unyielding, absolute authority. "I am looking for Trent Washington, Dominique Washington, and Gavin Washington. We have federal warrants for your immediate arrest." Gavin's outstretched arm dropped to his side. The arrogant, welcoming smile melted off his face, replaced by absolute horror. He blinked rapidly, looking between the imposing federal agent and the two severe compliance officers flanking him. The elite guests scrambled backward, eager to distance themselves from an escalating federal crime scene. Expensive champagne glasses clinked nervously as they were set down on passing trays. "Warrants!" Gavin stammered, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic pitch. "There must be some sort of massive misunderstanding here. I am the chief financial officer. We are hosting a private event. You have the wrong people." "There is no misunderstanding," I said, stepping smoothly around Dominique and moving to stand directly beside Special Agent Reynolds. Gavin's eyes darted toward me, widening in sheer terror as his brain finally connected the devastating dots. Dominique let out a breathless gasp, taking a hesitant step backward. Her sequined designer gown looked absurdly cheap against the harsh, unforgiving reality of the tactical windbreakers surrounding us. I opened my leather briefcase and pulled out the verification folder I had prepared with my attorney. I handed it directly to Special Agent Reynolds. "Here are the final physical copies of the fraudulent loan agreements, the verified IP address logs, and the mapped wire transfer ledgers. Everything matches the digital dossier perfectly." Agent Reynolds took the folder, nodding firmly. "Thank you, ma'am. Your cooperation has been exceptionally thorough and highly professional." I turned my body slowly, deliberately shifting my full attention back to Dominique. She was shaking now, her perfectly manicured hands trembling so violently she had to cross her arms to hide it. The smug sneer she had worn just 10 minutes ago was annihilated. I made sure my posture was flawless. I pitched my voice so that every local politician, affluent socialite, and photographer could hear my next words with absolute clarity. "Dominique," I began, letting the name roll off my tongue with freezing precision. "I am not here to beg for a job. I am not here to sweep your floors. I am the authorized senior financial risk auditor for Apex Financial Equities, the commercial bank that financed this building. And you are standing on stolen property." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered crowd. Flashbulbs erupted in a blinding frenzy as the local press realized they had stumbled into the most explosive financial scandal of the year. Dominique opened her mouth, her jaw trembling uncontrollably, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted wildly around the red carpet, silently begging someone to intervene to save her, to tell her this was a nightmare. No one stepped forward. "You forged my signature," I continued, stepping closer to her, forcing her to look me dead in the eye. "You stole my identity, hijacked my pristine credit rating, and committed massive federal wire fraud to fund this pathetic illusion of success. You thought you could use my money to buy your way into high society while treating me like garbage. But you forgot one crucial detail. I audit financial criminals for a living. You handed me the weapon I needed to dismantle your entire life." Trent finally snapped out of his paralyzed stupor. The realization that he was facing federal prison time crashed over him. His survival instinct, honed by years of running from creditors and dodging financial responsibilities, kicked into overdrive. He did not try to defend his wife or explain the situation to the authorities. He simply turned on his heel and bolted. Trent sprinted past the ice sculptures, aggressively shoving a waiter out of his way, desperately trying to reach the dark service alley behind the spa building. It was a cowardly, pathetic display of a man refusing to face the consequences of his actions. He did not even make it 10 yards. A federal agent, anticipating the flight risk of a cornered suspect, moved with terrifying speed. He intercepted Trent before he could reach the edge of the red carpet. The agent grabbed Trent by the shoulder of his bespoke tuxedo, spinning him around and slamming him firmly against the hood of a parked luxury vehicle. The sickening crunch of metal echoing in the street was followed by the sharp click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Trent's wrists. "Trent Washington," the arresting agent barked, pinning him securely against the car. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and bank fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Dominique let out a blood-curdling scream as she watched her husband get manhandled and cuffed like a common street criminal. The carefully curated facade of her billionaire lifestyle vaporized. She lunged forward, her high heels catching on the plush red carpet, but a female federal agent instantly blocked her path, grabbing her arms and swiftly forcing them behind her back to apply the restraints. "Get your hands off me right now!" Dominique shrieked loudly, thrashing wildly against the agent's unyielding grip. "Do you know who I am? I own this spa. I am the chief executive officer. Gavin, do something. Tell them she is lying." But Gavin could not do anything. He was currently backed up against the heavy glass doors of the spa, hyperventilating violently as two federal agents converged on him. The arrogant man who had proudly sent me a text message demanding I grovel to his family was now weeping openly, hot tears streaming down his face as they violently pulled his arms behind his back and secured the heavy metal cuffs tightly around his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." Special Agent Reynolds commanded, his voice booming across the entryway and echoing sharply against the towering glass facade of the spa. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." The formal recitation of their Miranda rights sounded entirely alien in this environment of imported marble velvet ropes and blinding flashbulbs. The charges were announced loudly and deliberately, ensuring the entire crowd grasped the severe magnitude of the situation. Federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, bank fraud. Each charge carried the heavy, crushing weight of a lengthy federal prison sentence. Dominique, who had managed to snatch a fresh champagne glass from a nearby waiter's tray during the initial chaos, in a desperate bid to calm her fraying nerves, completely lost whatever remained of her composure. The delicate crystal slipped from her trembling fingers. It plummeted to the pavement, shattering violently into hundreds of glittering shards across the plush red carpet. The sound of the breaking glass was sharp and final, mirroring the complete and utter destruction of her fake high society empire. "Gavin, do something!" Dominique shrieked, her voice tearing through the cool night air. She thrashed against the female federal agent securing her cuffs, her sequined designer gown twisting awkwardly around her legs. "Tell them this is your wife's fault. Tell them she authorized it. Gavin, open your mouth and fix this right now." But Gavin was utterly incapable of fixing anything. He was leaning heavily against the thick glass doors of the spa, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. He was hyperventilating so severely that his face had turned a sickly pale shade of green. He stared at the heavy metal handcuffs securing his wrists, his eyes wide with an absolute, unadulterated terror. The man who had arrogantly demanded I grovel to his family just 48 hours ago was now weeping uncontrollably. He begged the federal agents to loosen the cuffs, swearing blindly that he had only done what his brother told him to do. He was already throwing Trent under the bus in a pathetic attempt to save himself. While the federal agents secured the three suspects and began leading them toward the unmarked black transport vehicles, the two compliance officers from Apex Financial Equities moved with surgical precision. They bypassed the struggling family members and walked straight through the grand entrance into the opulent lobby of the spa. They carried thick stacks of bright orange legal notices. I watched through the massive glass walls as the bank officials began systematically dismantling the illusion of Lux Radiance Med Spa. They slapped a glaring orange seizure notice directly onto the custom-built imported Italian marble reception desk. They moved swiftly into the treatment rooms, placing federal asset seizure stickers on the highly expensive top-of-the-line laser therapy machines and the commercial cryotherapy chambers. Every single piece of equipment, every crystal chandelier, every velvet lounge chair purchased with my stolen identity was officially tagged and logged as physical evidence in a federal criminal investigation. The affluent crowd of local politicians, wealthy socialites, and elite networkers finally broke from their stunned, horrified paralysis. High society operates on a strict code of self-preservation, and being photographed at the center of a federal bank fraud raid is absolute professional suicide. Panic rippled through the gathered guests. They turned rapidly away from the flashbulbs, using their expensive suit jackets and designer purses to shield their faces from the eager local press photographers who were documenting every second of the spectacular downfall. The mass exodus was instantaneous and chaotic. The heavy velvet ropes were violently pushed aside as the elite guests scattered into the street, completely abandoning the complimentary luxury valet service in their desperate rush to hail cabs, summon ride shares, and flee the scene on foot. The glamorous red carpet was trampled, covered in shattered crystal-spilled champagne, and the chaotic footprints of a rapidly retreating crowd. The luxurious grand opening had officially devolved into a desperate, messy evacuation. I stood perfectly still in my dark charcoal power suit, observing the absolute wreckage of their lives. I felt no pity. I felt no guilt. I felt the profound grounding weight of absolute justice. Suddenly, a violent commotion erupted near the edge of the fleeing crowd. Two figures were aggressively shoving their way through the retreating socialites, elbowing people aside with frantic, desperate energy. It was Harrison and Sylvia. My in-laws had arrived late to the grand opening gala, likely expecting to walk into a royal coronation celebrating their son's brilliant entrepreneurial success. Instead, they walked directly into the flashing red and blue lights of federal law enforcement vehicles. Sylvia's face was contorted in sheer horror as she watched Trent being shoved roughly into the back of a black sports utility vehicle. Harrison's face was flushed a dark, dangerous shade of crimson, his eyes darting frantically across the chaotic scene until they locked directly onto me. They did not approach the federal agents to ask what was happening. They did not ask the local police for information. Driven by decades of pure, unchecked narcissism and an ingrained toxic belief that I existed solely to serve and protect their family, they lunged directly toward me. "Vanessa!" Sylvia screamed, her voice cracking hysterically as she pushed past a lingering photographer. "What have you done? Tell them to stop this right now." Harrison pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at my face. He marched up to me, his chest puffed out in a pathetic attempt at physical intimidation, completely ignoring the fact that armed federal agents were standing less than 5 feet away. "You vindictive, ungrateful woman!" Harrison roared, spit flying from his lips as he yelled over the ambient noise of the street. "You call those officers over here right this second. You tell the police this is all a massive misunderstanding. Tell them Gavin had your full permission to use those accounts. You are a senior auditor for the bank. You have the power to make this entire thing go away. Fix this right now before you ruin my son's lives." Sylvia grabbed my right forearm, her sharp fingernails digging painfully into the sleeve of my tailored blazer. "You are destroying our family over a petty dinner argument." She sobbed, her mascara running down her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. "Tell them it is a simple accounting mistake, Vanessa. Do your job and protect your husband." They genuinely believed I would simply wave my hand lie to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and risk going to federal prison myself, just to save their criminal sons from facing the consequences of their own deliberate actions. Their delusion was so deeply entrenched that even while watching Gavin and Trent being loaded into transport vehicles in handcuffs, they still viewed me as their subordinate problem solver. I looked down at Sylvia's hand clutching my arm. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or attempt to pull away defensively. I simply stared at her fingers with freezing intensity until she slowly, hesitantly pulled her hand away. I adjusted my posture, standing tall, projecting the absolute unyielding authority of a woman who held their entire future in the palm of her hand. I looked Harrison dead in the eye, watching the thick veins pulse furiously at his temples. He was still waiting for my compliance, expecting the obedient daughter-in-law, who had silently bankrolled his extravagant lifestyle for a decade, to miraculously shield them from prosecution. He actually believed his aggressive tone would force me back into my designated role as the family's financial servant. I slowly unclasped the brass lock of my sleek leather briefcase. I reached inside and retrieved a thick, sealed manila envelope. I did not hand it to him with a trembling grip. I presented it to him with the cold, absolute detachment of a corporate auditor delivering a catastrophic financial assessment. Harrison snatched the envelope from my hand, ripping the top open with clumsy tears. Sylvia leaned closely over his shoulder, her breathing ragged as she struggled to comprehend the dense legal text printed on the official federal documents. "There is no misunderstanding," I stated, my voice slicing effortlessly through the chaotic ambient noise of the flashing police lights and the murmuring crowd. "I am not here to protect your sons. I am the person who reported them." I handed the federal investigators the exact digital footprints Gavin left on our home network when he forged my signature. But more importantly, I handed them the detailed wire transfer ledgers. "The commercial bank traced the stolen loan funds directly into your personal checking accounts." Harrison's eyes darted frantically across the legal documents I had just handed him. It was a formal, undeniable notice of asset seizure from the Internal Revenue Service, explicitly expedited due to the involvement of federally insured embezzled capital. Trent and Dominique did not just lease a spa building. I continued making sure every single syllable landed with the crushing weight of a judge's gavel. They illegally funneled $200,000 of that stolen commercial loan directly to you and Sylvia to quickly pay off your massive gambling debts. You accepted stolen federal funds. You did not report the illegal income. And now the federal government is holding you entirely accountable for receiving and spending embezzled capital. Sylvia let out a pathetic, high-pitched gasp, clutching her chest as her knees visibly buckled beneath her expensive evening gown. "The Internal Revenue Service is officially seizing your house tomorrow morning to recover the stolen debt." I delivered the final fatal blow without a single ounce of hesitation. "The property has already been legally encumbered. The foreclosure notices will be physically taped to your front door at dawn. You have exactly 24 hours to pack whatever fits into a basic suitcase and vacate the premises." The absolute crushing reality of their complete financial ruin hit them simultaneously. Sylvia let out a gut-wrenching wail, a sound completely devoid of her usual theatrical manipulation. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed in a dead faint, hitting the red carpet with a dull, heavy thud. Her designer purse spilled onto the pavement, its contents mingling with the shattered crystal of Dominique's broken champagne glass. Harrison did not attempt to catch his wife. His face twisted into a mask of pure primal rage. The terrifying realization that his entire comfortable parasite existence had just been annihilated by the woman he had relentlessly disrespected caused his fragile ego to violently snap. "I will kill you!" Harrison roared, lunging directly at my throat with both hands outstretched, his fingers curled into violent claws. He never even made it within arm's reach. The local police officers who had been actively managing the crowd perimeter reacted with explosive speed. Two heavily armored officers tackled Harrison mid-lunge, slamming him face first into the sturdy hood of a nearby police cruiser. His nose smashed heavily against the cold metal, a dark stream of blood instantly pouring down the side of his face. He thrashed and kicked wildly, screaming obscenities and demanding, "I pay for destroying his entire bloodline." But the officers easily overpowered his pathetic struggle. They wrenched his arms tightly behind his back, slapping heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists with a loud, definitive click. Harrison, the arresting officer, barked, pressing his forearm firmly into the back of my father-in-law's neck to subdue him completely. "You are under arrest for assaulting a federal witness and actively resisting arrest. Stay on the ground." I took a single calm step backward, smoothing out the lapels of my tailored charcoal blazer. I looked down at the absolute wreckage I had systematically engineered. Sylvia was slowly regaining consciousness on the sticky, ruined red carpet, sobbing hysterically as paramedics rushed over to assess her condition. Harrison was securely pinned against a police cruiser, bleeding and screaming futile curses into the cold night air. Trent and Dominique were already locked securely in the back of an unmarked federal sport utility vehicle, their faces buried in their hands in absolute defeat. Gavin was sobbing uncontrollably in the back of a separate police cruiser, his pathetic tears marking the definitive end of his fabricated, arrogant existence. They had all demanded my total submission. They had all expected me to blindly fund their massive delusions of grandeur and apologize for the sheer privilege of being abused. They thought my strategic silence earlier this week was a definitive sign of surrender. They had completely forgotten that a senior financial risk auditor is rigorously trained to observe, calculate, and systematically dismantle massive threats with lethal precision. I did not offer them a parting insult. I did not wait around to watch the federal agents physically transport them to the holding facility. Their destruction was absolute, comprehensive, and permanently sealed. My presence was no longer required. I turned my back on the screaming, chaotic scene. I walked away from the glaring red and blue lights, leaving the completely shattered illusion of Lux Radiance Med Spa behind me. The rhythmic, steady click of my stiletto heels against the pavement felt like a powerful, victorious drumbeat. I walked back to the discreet public parking garage where I had left my vehicle, my posture perfectly composed, my breathing exceptionally steady and relaxed. When I slid into the driver's seat of my car, the quiet silence of the cabin wrapped around me like a comforting protective blanket. I gripped the smooth leather steering wheel, taking a deep cleansing breath of the cool Chicago night air. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for 10 long, agonizing years was entirely gone. I started the engine, pulled smoothly out of the concrete parking garage, and drove directly toward the luxury hotel where Leo and Mia were safely sleeping, completely unaware that their mother had just aggressively cleared the path for a beautiful, untainted future. I woke up the following morning in the luxury hotel suite feeling remarkably refreshed. For the first time in a decade, my mind was not racing with anxiety about how to cover Gavin's debts or manage his family's chaotic demands. I ordered a massive breakfast for Leo and Mia, watching them happily dig into their pancakes while I casually opened my laptop on the mahogany desk. I navigated to the local news portals, fully expecting to see a brief mention of the raid. I drastically underestimated the media spectacle. The story of Lux Radiance Med Spa had absolutely exploded overnight. It was the lead headline on every major news outlet in the city. The front page photograph captured the exact moment Trent was slammed against the hood of the luxury vehicle, his face contorted in sheer panic. Right below it was a crystal clear image of Dominique, her designer sequined gown looking utterly ridiculous as female federal agents secured her wrists behind her back. The journalists had meticulously dismantled their entire fraudulent empire. The articles detailed the aggressive federal raid, the immediate asset seizures, and the sheer audacity of stealing nearly $1 million to fund a fake high society lifestyle. Lux Radiance Med Spa was already being dubbed a spectacular cautionary tale of white-collar crime. Financial commentators were analyzing the severity of the bank fraud and the identity theft, Noting that the perpetrators were foolish enough to target a federally insured commercial lender, reading the comprehensive public destruction of their fabricated reality brought me an immense grounding sense of satisfaction. They had spent months planning to launch themselves into the elite social stratosphere using my stolen identity. Instead, they had successfully broadcast their criminal incompetence to the entire world. There was no public relations spin that could possibly save them from this level of documented humiliation. While I scrolled through the scathing editorial pieces, my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently on the desk. The caller identification displayed an automated warning indicating an incoming collect call from the county correctional facility. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again, and then again. Gavin was frantically, desperately trying to reach me from a jail telephone. After the fourth missed call, I listened to the voicemails he had frantically left. His voice was completely shattered, oscillating between pathetic, racking sobs and desperate, frantic pleading. "Vanessa, please pick up the phone." Gavin wept into the receiver, his voice echoing against the hard walls of the holding facility. "You have to stop this. The conditions in here are horrible. They are treating me like a violent criminal. You need to call the police and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you gave me permission to use your credit profile. Please, Vanessa. I was manipulated. Trent and Dominique lied to me. They told me it was a foolproof business plan and that we would pay the loan back before you ever found out. They used me to get to you. You know I would never intentionally hurt you. You have to drop the charges. I cannot survive in federal prison. I love you. Please save me." The sheer, unadulterated delusion in his voice was staggering. Even while sitting in a county jail cell facing federal indictments, Gavin genuinely believed he could gaslight me into absorbing the blame for his deliberate, calculated felonies. I was still trying to play the victim, desperately attempting to shift the entire burden of his massive financial crimes onto his brother and his sister-in-law. He completely ignored the fact that he was the one who physically logged into our home network, bypassed my security protocols, and expertly forged my signature on the commercial loan applications. When the phone began to vibrate for the fifth consecutive time, I decided it was time to permanently sever this connection. I accepted the collect call and placed the phone on speaker, resting it on the polished glass surface of the hotel desk. "Vanessa, thank God," Gavin practically screamed through the crackling audio connection. "Listen to me. You have to call your lawyers right now. You need to tell them to drop the charges. We can settle this privately. I will sign whatever divorce papers you want. Just tell the authorities to let me go." I took a slow, deep breath, maintaining the cold, clinical detachment of a senior auditor delivering a final, fatal assessment. "Gavin," I stated, my voice freezing the panicked desperation on his end of the line. "I am not the one pressing charges against you. You committed massive coordinated bank fraud against a federally insured lending institution. You bypassed stringent security measures, stole my personal identification, and expertly forged my legal signature on commercial loan contracts. The federal government is prosecuting you. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service are the ones building the case against you. I am merely their primary, highly cooperative witness. I cannot drop the charges because I am not the entity you robbed. You robbed the federal banking system. Enjoy your cell." Before Gavin could utter another pathetic, sniveling excuse or attempt to beg for my non-existent mercy, I ended the call. I immediately accessed my phone settings and permanently blocked the phone numbers associated with the county correctional facility. I would never have to listen to his manipulative, weeping voice ever again. He was entirely the federal government's problem now. I closed my laptop and focused my attention back on my children, eager to leave the hotel and finalize the move into our beautiful new townhouse. I assumed the legal battlefield was entirely secure under Bradley's expert management. However, the cornered rats of my former family had one final desperate maneuver left to play. Later that same afternoon, I was finalizing the logistics of our residential move with the hotel concierge when a stern-looking man in a cheap suit approached me in the grand lobby. He asked to confirm my legal name. The moment I nodded, he thrust a thick, heavily sealed manila envelope into my hands, stated that I had been officially served, and briskly walked out the revolving glass doors. I tore open the envelope, my professional instincts immediately shifting into high alert. It was a formal legal subpoena, commanding my mandatory appearance for a sworn deposition. I scanned the filing details and felt a sharp, furious spike of adrenaline. The subpoena was not issued by the federal prosecution team. It was issued by the aggressive, high-priced criminal defense attorney Dominique had somehow managed to retain. I read through the attached preliminary defense motions, and the sheer audacity of their legal strategy became shockingly clear. Faced with insurmountable digital evidence and impending federal prison sentences, Dominique and her legal team were attempting a desperate scorched earth victim blaming defense. They were formally alleging that I was the actual mastermind behind the entire fraudulent commercial loan. The defense motion claimed that I had deliberately orchestrated the $850,000 funding to trap Trent and Dominique, fully intending to sabotage their business and frame them for fraud as revenge for our petty family disagreements. They were preparing to drag me into a brutal, highly publicized legal deposition to assassinate my character, dismantle my professional credibility, and convince a federal judge that I was the true villain of the story. Dominique was not going down without a vicious, dirty fight. The subpoena from Dominique's defense attorney was a laughable attempt at legal intimidation. I did not panic. I handed the document directly to Bradley, who immediately coordinated with the federal prosecutors. We bypassed the preliminary deposition entirely and went straight to the federal trial. Dominique actually believed she could construct a false narrative in a federal courtroom to save herself. She was deeply mistaken. When the trial commenced, I walked into the grand federal courthouse wearing the exact same dark charcoal power suit I wore on the night of the raid. I took the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the absolute truth. The federal prosecutor guided me through my initial testimony, allowing me to lay out the immaculate digital paper trail of the $850,000 loan. Then came the cross-examination. Dominique's highly paid defense attorney approached the podium, puffing out his chest, ready to unleash his victim-blaming strategy. He accused me of being a bitter, scorned woman. He claimed I deliberately authorized the loan to sabotage my in-laws because I was jealous of Dominique's entrepreneurial vision. He raised his voice, demanding I admit that I orchestrated the entire financial collapse out of pure spite over a petty family argument at a restaurant. I looked at the defense attorney with absolute, unblinking composure. I leaned directly into the microphone. I am a senior financial risk auditor for the parent company of the defrauded bank. I stated, my voice echoing clearly through the silent courtroom. If I had orchestrated this loan, I would not have used my husband's unsecured desktop computer on a residential internet network. Furthermore, the defense's timeline is entirely fabricated. The loan origination documents were digitally signed and submitted 2 months prior to the physical assault I suffered at the restaurant. They did not secure this money because I set a trap. They secured this money to fund a fraudulent luxury spa, and then they physically attacked me to ensure I remained a submissive, silent financial provider who would never dare to check her own credit report. I gestured toward this prosecution's evidence table. You are looking at verified biometric login failures, time-stamped geolocation data, and forged signatures that a forensic expert has already testified do not match my biometric handwriting profile. I did not set them up. Your clients are simply incredibly incompetent criminals. The courtroom remained dead silent. Dominique's defense attorney stood frozen at the podium, his mouth slightly open, utterly failing to find a single logical counter-argument against hard, irrefutable digital forensics. He stammered, attempted to redirect his line of questioning, and ultimately retreated to his seat in absolute defeat. The jury watched him collapse, their expressions reflecting complete disgust for the defendants. I stepped down from the witness stand, knowing I had just driven the final nail into their legal coffins. The federal sentencing hearing took place 3 weeks later. The judge, a severe man with zero tolerance for white-collar exploitation, delivered a scathing reprimand to the defendants. He stated that their actions demonstrated a profound malicious level of greed and a complete disregard for the financial regulations that protect American citizens. He highlighted the sheer cruelty of stealing an identity from a spouse and a family member to fund a vain, superficial lifestyle. The gavel came down with definitive, crushing authority. Trent and Dominique were found guilty on all counts of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The judge sentenced them both to 5 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. Dominique let out a ragged, ugly sob as the federal marshals moved in to escort her away. Trent simply stared at the floor, completely broken. Who had pathetically attempted to use his status as a father to Leo and Mia to secure a lighter plea deal was shown absolutely no mercy. Because he was the individual who actually executed the digital forgery and bypassed the security protocols within my home. The judge handed him a severe sentence of 3 years in federal prison. My ex-husband looked back at me one final time before being led out in handcuffs, tears streaming down his face. I offered him nothing but a cold, empty stare. While my former husband and his brother were being processed into the federal prison system, the absolute financial ruin of Harrison and Sylvia was brutally finalized. The Internal Revenue Service does not negotiate with individuals who harbor and spend embezzled federal funds. The tax agency moved with terrifying efficiency. The morning after the trial concluded, federal agents arrived at my in-laws' sprawling suburban home with official eviction notices and property seizure mandates. Harrison and Sylvia were forced to stand on their manicured front lawn in broad daylight, while government contractors changed the locks on their custom mahogany doors. Their affluent neighbors watched in stunned silence as the luxury vehicles parked in their driveway were loaded onto flatbed tow trucks and repossessed. Every single piece of valuable furniture, designer clothing, and expensive jewelry inside the house was seized to be auctioned off to recover the stolen $200,000 they had used to pay their massive gambling debts. They were left with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs and a few basic suitcases of personal items. With their sons incarcerated and their stolen wealth completely vaporized, Harrison and Sylvia were brutally expelled from the affluent society they had worshipped for decades. Their wealthy country club friends immediately severed all contact, refusing to associate with convicted fraudsters and tax evaders. Without my corporate income to quietly bail them out, my in-laws faced the harsh, unforgiving reality of absolute poverty. They were forced to relocate to a tiny, rundown studio apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood far outside the city limits. The glamorous retirement they had stolen my money to finance was replaced by the grim necessity of waiting in line for government assistance. They rely entirely on basic food stamps and a meager Social Security stipend that barely covers their rent and utility bills. Harrison, who used to brag about his sophisticated palate and expensive whiskey collection, now spends his days sitting in a cramped, moldy living room watching a small television. Sylvia, who once paraded around in designer gowns and mocked my work ethic, is now a social pariah. They are completely isolated, stripped of their false power, and left to rot in the miserable bed they deliberately made for themselves. With my former in-laws thoroughly neutralized and banished to the margins of society, I turned my absolute focus to severing the final legal tether binding me to their disgraced bloodline. The family court hearing for my divorce was a spectacular display of judicial efficiency. Because Gavin was actively incarcerated in a federal penitentiary for committing a severe felony directly against his own wife, his defense attorney had absolutely no leverage to negotiate. There were no prolonged mediation sessions. There were no bitter disputes over asset division. The separation agreement I had previously manipulated Gavin into signing was legally binding, meaning he had already forfeited the marital home, which was currently being auctioned off by the bank to satisfy his massive secondary mortgage debts. The family court judge reviewed the extensive federal conviction records and the documented evidence of Gavin prioritizing a fraudulent luxury spa over the financial and emotional safety of his own children. The judge explicitly noted that Gavin's willingness to bankrupt his family for his brother's vanity project demonstrated a severe lack of moral character and parental fitness. He emphasized that the children needed a stable, secure environment free from the influence of convicted felons. The ruling was swift, definitive, and totally uncompromising. I was granted absolute sole legal and physical custody of Leo and Mia. Gavin was completely stripped of all parental rights. He was legally barred from requesting visitation, making medical decisions, or attempting to contact the children upon his eventual release from federal prison. The gavel strike echoing through the courtroom was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I walked out of the family courthouse holding the finalized divorce decree in my hand, feeling an immense soaring sense of liberation. The heavy, suffocating chain that had dragged me down for a decade was permanently severed. I was officially free, and my children were permanently protected from the generational toxicity of their father's family. My personal victory in the courtroom was immediately followed by a massive, unprecedented triumph in my professional life. The executive board at Apex Financial Equities had spent weeks reviewing the spectacular fallout of the commercial loan fraud. They were acutely aware that my precise, rapid deployment of encrypted audit trails had not only secured the federal indictments, but had also allowed the bank to immediately seize the fraudulent assets before the stolen capital could be completely squandered. I had saved the financial conglomerate from a devastating public relations nightmare and minimized their shareholder losses through sheer tactical brilliance. On a crisp Tuesday morning, David, the chief financial officer, summoned me to the executive boardroom. I walked in to find the entire corporate board of directors seated around the massive mahogany table. They did not ask me to sit and defend my position. They stood up and offered a unanimous round of applause. David formally announced that the board had reviewed my crisis management protocols and determined that my risk assessment capabilities were unparalleled in the industry. Effective immediately, I was being promoted to the executive suite as the new chief risk officer for the entire financial conglomerate. The promotion came with a breathtaking compensation package, exclusive stock options, and a massive corner office featuring panoramic views of the Chicago skyline. I spent my first week as Chief Risk Officer implementing rigorous new underwriting protocols across all subsidiary branches to ensure no one could ever exploit the system the way Trent and Dominique had attempted. My colleagues, who had initially stared at me during the social media smear campaign, now treated me with a level of profound reverence. I had transformed a targeted identity theft operation intended to destroy my career into the ultimate catalyst for my ascension to the highest echelon of the corporate hierarchy. Armed with an impenetrable legal shield and a massive influx of corporate capital, it was finally time to physically transition my family into our new reality. I checked us out of the luxury hotel suite that had served as our secure fortress during the chaotic legal battles. We drove through the quiet, tree-lined streets of an exclusive, highly secure neighborhood, far away from the superficial, status-obsessed suburbs where Harrison and Sylvia used to parade their stolen wealth. We pulled into the private driveway of the stunning four-bedroom townhouse I had purchased in cash through my independent corporate entity. The architecture was flawless, featuring tall windows that flooded the spacious rooms with warm, natural sunlight. There were no memories of Gavin pacing the floors demanding money. There were no echoes of Dominique's shrill, condescending laughter or Trent's delusional business pitches. The air inside the house was clean, fresh, and entirely peaceful. I spent the weekend decorating the townhouse with pieces that reflected my own taste, free from Gavin's cheap preferences. I hung vibrant artwork, arranged lush indoor plants, and set up a massive home library for Leo and Mia. I watched as my children ran excitedly through the expansive living room, their joyful laughter bouncing off the pristine white walls. They sprinted upstairs to claim their new bedrooms, completely unburdened by the dark, heavy atmosphere that used to suffocate our previous home. We spent our first evening in the new house cooking dinner together, the kitchen filled with the aroma of roasted vegetables and the sound of my favorite jazz playlist. There was no tension, no looming threat of an argument, no walking on eggshells. I walked into the massive state-of-the-art kitchen and ran my hand along the cool, polished marble countertop. I had orchestrated the complete dismantling of a toxic family empire, secured federal convictions against the people who tried to destroy me, and elevated my career to unimaginable heights, all while ensuring my children never spent a single night feeling unsafe or unloved. I unpacked a box of premium coffee beans, listening to the gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the old oak trees in our private backyard. Every single detail of this beautiful, secure life was built entirely by my own hands. The townhouse was more than just a piece of premium real estate. It was a tangible, physical manifestation of my absolute victory. I unpacked our remaining boxes with a profound, unshakable sense of calm, knowing that no one would ever be allowed to breach the perfect peaceful sanctuary I had so ruthlessly fought to create. Exactly 1 year had passed since the federal gavel fell. The morning sun streamed generously through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our townhouse, casting a warm glow across the quartz kitchen island. I stood at the espresso machine, listening to the gentle hum of the grinder. Leo and Mia sat side by side at the island, their textbooks spread out in an organized fashion. They were working diligently on their weekend homework assignments, sharing jokes with a carefree joy that warmed my soul. The dark circles under their eyes had completely vanished. They were thriving. Leo had joined a robotics club, and Mia was excelling in her reading programs. Their environment was no longer a battlefield of whispered arguments and financial anxiety. It was a secure, nurturing sanctuary built on absolute stability and unconditional love. I watched them quietly for a moment. There was no more walking on eggshells. There were no more manipulative visits from in-laws demanding money. We prioritized our peace above all else. The clatter of the mail slot broke my quiet reflection. I picked up the stack of envelopes from the hardwood floor and sorted through them. A single crumpled envelope caught my immediate attention. The return address was blank, but the shaky handwriting was unmistakably familiar. It was Sylvia. Despite the strict no-contact directives, she had managed to mail a physical letter. I did not feel a spike of anxiety. I did not feel a familiar rush of guilt or obligation. I felt absolutely nothing. I carried the envelope back to the kitchen, grabbed a silver letter opener, and sliced through the cheap paper. I unfolded the lined notebook page and scanned the frantic, pathetic scrawl. Sylvia was begging. The letter was a desperate, rambling plea for access to Leo and Mia. She detailed the miserable, squalid conditions of the tiny, rundown apartment she now shared with Harrison. She complained bitterly about relying on government assistance and the profound, isolating shame of being shunned by their former country club friends. She attempted to weaponize her deteriorating health, claiming she only had a few good years left and desperately needed the joy of her grandchildren to sustain her. There was no apology for the wire fraud. There was no remorse for attempting to bankrupt me. There was only a narcissistic demand for me to provide her with an emotional lifeline. I read the final sentence, folded the letter neatly in half, and walked directly over to my home office alcove. I did not shed a single tear. I did not experience a fleeting moment of pity for the woman who had happily watched her daughter-in-law physically assault me. I turned on the heavy-duty paper shredder sitting next to my mahogany desk. The machine hummed to life with a satisfying mechanical growl. I dropped Sylvia's desperate manipulative letter straight into the metal teeth. I watched with profound, absolute detachment as the machine violently shredded her words into hundreds of tiny, illegible strips of paper. I hit the power button, plunging the room back into total tranquility. She had made her choices, and I was enforcing the permanent, uncompromising consequences. I returned to the kitchen and poured my freshly brewed coffee into a heavy ceramic mug. The rich, bold aroma of the expensive imported roast filled the air, a small daily luxury I now enjoyed without a single ounce of guilt. I added a splash of cream, stirred it slowly, and walked past the kitchen island, dropping a gentle kiss onto the top of Mia's head. I unlatched the heavy glass doors leading to the back patio and stepped out onto the expansive wooden porch. The crisp morning breeze swept across my face, carrying the clean, fresh scent of the blooming hydrangeas I had recently planted along the pristine white fence. I took a deep, grounding breath, allowing the cool air to fill my lungs completely. The silence surrounding me was absolutely exquisite. There was no drama, there was no screaming, there was no financial manipulation, no gaslighting, and no defending my basic human dignity against a pack of arrogant, entitled grifters. My professional career had skyrocketed to the executive peak, my financial assets were impenetrable, and my legal boundaries were flawlessly maintained. I walked to the edge of the porch and leaned against the sturdy wooden railing. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the rich flavor. As I looked out over the meticulously manicured lawn, my mind drifted back to that fateful anniversary dinner 1 year ago. The shocking, stinging impact of Dominique's hand across my cheek had felt like a catastrophic humiliation at the time. But standing here now, surrounded by the beautiful, untouchable fortress I had built with my own two hands, a genuine radiant smile spread across my face. That slap at the restaurant was not a tragedy. It was the greatest gift Dominique could have ever given me. It was the exact violent wake-up call I desperately needed to snap out of my submissive coma and aggressively reclaim my entire life. They thought they were breaking a secondary wife to remind her of her place. Instead, they awoke a financial apex predator who meticulously dismantled their fraudulent empire, seized their stolen wealth, and banished them to the miserable margins of society where they truly belonged. The back door slid open, and Leo and Mia bounded out onto the patio, laughing brightly as they chased each other into the vibrant sunlit yard. Their pure, carefree energy filled the beautiful, quiet morning air, a constant reminder of exactly why I fought so relentlessly. They were safe, they were happy, and they were completely mine. I knew that no matter what challenges the future might hold, I always possessed the strength and the unwavering clarity to protect this extraordinary life I had designed for us. I watched my children play, holding my warm mug, basking in the glorious, hard-won triumph of my absolute peace. The story of Vanessa's ultimate triumph over her deeply toxic, financially abusive in-laws offers a profound lesson on the mechanics of true liberation. It teaches us that authentic power does not roar, it calculates. When faced with visceral disrespect and devastating betrayal, such as a public physical assault and the horrifying discovery of massive identity theft, the most immediate human instinct is to lash out, scream, or desperately demand justice. However, this narrative masterfully illustrates that reactive anger often plays right into the hands of narcissistic manipulators who thrive on emotional chaos and predictability. By choosing strategic silence, Vanessa completely neutralized her abuser's primary weapon, her expected submission. Instead of confronting her husband immediately upon discovering the fraudulent commercial loan, she suppressed her fury, locked down her digital footprint, consulted specialized legal counsel, and meticulously built an airtight federal case. She allowed her abusers to become entirely intoxicated by their own arrogance, letting their unchecked egos blind them to their impending downfall. This level of restraint requires immense emotional discipline, the extraordinary ability to sit quietly while observing people actively trying to destroy your future, knowing you hold the undeniable evidence that will eventually burn their fabricated empire to the ground. Ultimately, this story boldly redefines what it means to set firm boundaries. It demonstrates that walking away from abuse is never an act of surrender, but rather a calculated act of self-preservation and supreme self-worth. Absolute peace is not found by attempting to fix or heal toxic people. It is forged by surgically removing their access to your life, your resources, and your peace of mind. Evaluate the uncompromising boundaries in your own life today and dare to silently cut off the energy you give to those who continuously fail to respect your fundamental worth.